Hey, what's up everyone and welcome to Daily Code Buffer. Welcome to the Spring Security 6 tutorial. In this video, we are going to learn a lot about Spring Security. So we are going to learn about the basics of the Spring Security, what is security, what are the different components to the Spring Security, and we are also going to understand how we can work around with all the different components to configure our own security aspects for our Spring Boot application. We'll also learn about the JWT, what is the JSON Web Tokens, how to use JSON Web Tokens, how to configure our application so that we can accept and create the JSON Web Tokens, how to log out with JSON Web Tokens, and also how to work with the microservices using the JSON Web Tokens as well. So there are a bunch of different things available in this tutorial from the basics itself. So you'll be able to understand the core concepts of the Spring Security, and post this tutorial, you will not feel that Spring Security is complex. So you will be able to understand complete details, and once you implement it, you will be able to configure your application as well with Spring Security. So without any further ado, let's get started with the Spring Security. So let's talk about Spring Security. Security is really important part of your applications. So whatever the APIs that we create or whatever the web applications that we create, we need to make sure that those applications, those APIs are secured properly to maintain the sanity of our application. Every day we see there are different types of hacks happening, and there are a lot of different security leaks, data leaks happening due to security. So we need to make sure that whatever the applications, whatever the APIs that we're building, those APIs are secured properly and with all the proper latest security configurations. Now, to keep up with the latest security details, we might not be able to do it, and we will not be able to implement security every time whenever there is a changes or whenever there is a new bug introduced or new flaws introduced in the security. We cannot do all those things at the same time because we are more focused on creating the functionalities of our application. So at that time, Spring Security can help us a lot. What Spring Security does is, Spring Security gives us a set of implementation that we can implement in our application. So we do not have to worry about implementing each and every details of the security part. We can just plug in the Spring Security and everything will work as a built-in function, and our APIs will be secured with the Spring Security with all the latest details. And there are always options to configure our Spring Security. So it will reduce a lot of boilerplate code for us to implement the security for our applications. Whenever we are talking with the Spring Security, we always feel that Spring Security is really difficult, but trust me, Spring Security is really easy to implement in our applications. We just need to understand about the few nitty-gritty topics or few nitty-gritty details about the Spring Security. So once we are aware of those terms, then Spring Security is really easy. And we do not implement Spring Security every time now and then. We just implement once in our application and we just forget, and we are good with all our APIs that we build within the application. So within this Spring Security, what we are going to understand is, we are going to understand the introduction, which is what we did currently, and then we are going to implement the security within the application. So we are going to implement Spring Security within the application. We are going to create a Spring Boot application. Within that, we will introduce Spring Security and understand how Spring Security works. We are also going to understand about the custom configurations. So we are going to understand how the custom configuration works within the Spring Security and what all things that we can change within the Spring Security. We are also going to understand about the CSRF, that is the cross-site request forgery, and how it works and what are the different ways that we can handle it. The other thing that we are going to implement is the user registration and login. So we are going to implement the complete user registration and login with the help of database. So we are going to introduce a database where we are going to store the user registration, and we are also build a login API and a logout API to log in and log out all your users to your applications. for all your APIs as well. So we are going to build that as well. And then what we are going to do is we are going to introduce the JWT. So we are going to understand what is JWT and how JWT helps within our system. And then what we are going to do is we are going to implement complete JWT within the application. So we are going to understand the details about the JWT, that is the JSON Web Tokens. And we are going to implement complete JWT as well with all the different methods. So with this JWT, we are going to implement each and every methods, how JWT works and what is the best way to implement JWT for your applications. And we are also going to understand about how you will implement JWT for your microservices and your application, your full stack application as well, for your UI as well, how you will be able to implement that as well. We will also see how we will be able to log in with SSOs, right? So there are all the different single sign-on applications available, like login with Gmail, GitHub, Facebook. So we are going to understand that as well, how you should be able to log into that system and how to leverage the existing systems for your security purposes. So we are going to understand each and everything in detail. So let's start implementing the Spring Security in your applications. Now in this section, let's understand how Spring Security will work. So first of all, what we need to understand is how the security works, right? So suppose you have an API. So for this API, what you need to do is you need to implement the security. Currently, any client can come here and access your API, right? But what you need to do is whenever there is a client request for your APIs, you need to make sure that there is a proper authentication and authorization for your request, and after that only you allow your users to access that API. So let's take the example of Gmail here. Okay, so whenever you are trying to log into Gmail, what will happen is if you are not logged into the Gmail, what it will ask is it will ask you to log into the system, right? So before accessing your account, before accessing your Gmail, it checks that are you logged into the system or not. And if you're not logged in, it will ask for you to log in. So what it will happen is once it checks that okay, you're not logged in, what it will do is it will ask you to log in within the login page. So it will come here and it will ask that okay, you log into the system, you give your username and you give your password, and then you log in. So what application will do is application will create a session ID. Okay, and this session ID will be stored in your browser. Okay, now once you logged into the system, you gave the username and password, and within the application, within your Gmail itself, it checked that okay, whatever the username and whatever the password that you have given, those are valid, and based on that validation, they created the session ID, and that session ID is stored in your browser. Okay, now after that, once the session ID is stored in the browser, with every different request, like you go to your home page, you go to your inbox, you compose a mail, you send an email. So for every request, what will happen is it will check for this session ID, whatever it is stored here, and this session ID will be passed along as a request that okay, to understand that for my Gmail application, that okay, is this user logged in or not? And if I have a session ID, I can assume, Gmail can assume that okay, session ID was created and this session ID is valid. It will do the internal validation for this session ID and check okay, the session ID is valid and I have the authentication details. Okay, then I should not ask the user to log in again. I will allow this user to go to the home page, to go to the inbox, to compose an email and to send the email as well. Everything it will allow based on the session that it has been created. Okay, now until and unless the session is valid, you can do everything. And if you click on the logout button, what it will do is it will clear this session from your browser, and what it will do is it will also clear the session from your application itself. Okay, so at the logout, your session is cleared and the session from your application is also cleared. Now you would have also experienced that whenever you open a Gmail in Chrome browser, you are asked to log in. But when you open the same in different browsers, suppose you open in Safari, then at that time also you are asked to log in again, because this session is different than this session. Though the user is same, the user agent is different, so your requests are different and your session generation is also different. So that's why in Chrome there is a different session maintained, and in Safari different session has been maintained. Okay, so that's how this entire login functionality and how your session is maintained works within your application. So let's implement the same thing. Let's see the same thing, how it works within our application. Let's create a simple Spring Boot project and implement Spring Security to understand all these details, how you will be able to log in, how your session ID works, and how your different browser works within this system. Hey everyone, let's talk about something that we all deal with. Passwords. How many of you struggle to remember them, or worse, to reuse the same password for your personal and work accounts? If at least one account gets compromised, it's game over. That's where NotPass comes in, created by the minds behind NordVPN, the world's leading VPN service. NotPass is an easy to use password manager designed to keep your business and personal accounts safe, secure and hassle-free. With NotPass, you can securely store your passwords, credit card details, and even get a real-time updates if your password is found in the dark web. You can safely share your credentials for autofill across your team members with just a few clicks without any hassle and without even sharing your actual passwords. It uses end-to-end encryption and zero knowledge architecture, so no one will be able to know your password until shared, not even NotPass themselves. It's super simple, plus it also works across all your devices. Simple, secure and hassle-free. Use the code DailyCode at notpass.com to get a free 3 months of NotPass business. Trust me, once you try it and once you are used to it, you will not go back to your sticky notes or emailing your passwords or keeping a note of your passwords. So stay secure and stay stress-free with NotPass. Go to notpass.com/dailycode. Now back to the video. Now in the previous section, we saw that how the entire Spring Security works and how security generally works and how the data has been stored. Now let's create a Spring Boot application to understand how everything works technically. So to create a Spring Boot application, what we'll do is we'll go to the browser and we'll go to Spring Initializer, that is start.spring.io, where we can create our Spring Boot application. So here you can see that we will create a Spring Boot application where the project type would be Maven, the language would be Java, and we are going to use the latest Spring Boot version, that is Spring Boot 3.3.4. You can use the same version or you can use the latest stable version available whenever you are seeing this video. Now the group details. What I'll do is, for the group details I will add com.dailycodebuffer. The artifact name I'll give as Spring Security 6 because that's what we are learning. And the rest of the name should be same. Let me just add security here as the package name. I'm going to give the packaging as jar file and Java language as Java 21. This is what I'm going to add. And what I will do is I will add the dependency as a Spring Web dependency. Okay, as I want to create a Spring Web application. Now this is what I'm adding, nothing else. Okay. So let's create this project and open in IntelliJ IDEA, or you can use any of your IDE, either Spring Tool Suite or Eclipse or VS Code, whatever is preferable. I prefer IntelliJ IDEA, so I'll be opening in IntelliJ IDEA. So let me just generate this project and open in IntelliJ IDEA. So here you can see that I opened the project in IntelliJ IDEA. And here you can see that this is a simple project where I can see that I have the main package. Within Java package, I have the main Spring Security file. And within the resources, I have the application.properties, which says this is a Spring Security 6 project. So what I will do is, let me just start this application simply. And I can see that I can start my application. Okay. So within this application, what I will do is I will create a simple controller. So let me just create a Java class, and within the controller package, I will create a welcome controller. Okay. And to make this as a REST API controller, I will annotate this with REST controller. And I'm going to create a simple controller, public string welcome return welcome to daily code buffer. Okay, so here you can see that the simple controller I have created, and I will annotate this with get mapping, and this is the default URL resource that I have added. Okay, so this is my simple controller and a simple method available. What I will do is I will start my application here. Okay, and here you can see that my application is started. So now what I can do is I can go to the browser and I can go to localhost 8080 and I can see that I'm getting welcome to daily code buffer. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll use the same thing in Postman to see if this API is working. So here, new API, URL, get mapping and send. And here you can see that I can see welcome to daily code buffer. So my simple API is completely working fine, but there is no security. Okay, so let's add the security in the next video. In the previous section, we saw that we created a simple Spring Boot application with a simple API. Now within that, let's implement the Spring security. So to implement the Spring security, what we will do is we will go back to the Spring initializer, and this is the project that we have created, right? So now within this, you can see that we have just added the Spring Web dependency, nothing else. So what we will do is we will add a new dependency, that is a security dependency. So here you can see that it is a Spring security dependency, which says that it is a highly customizable authentication and access control framework for Spring applications. So once we add this, we will have the capability to implement the Spring security. So Spring security project, which is a Spring security 6 framework, will be added directly to our project. Okay, so once we add this, we can go to explore section, and within this pom.xml file of this project, you will be able to see that Spring security, Spring Boot starter security has been added. Okay, so what we will do is we will copy this file, and I will go to IntelliJ IDEA. I will go to pom.xml file and I will paste this. Okay, and I will refresh my Maven project. You can see that this is a simple thing that I added. I just added the Spring Boot security and the Spring Boot security test as a test dependency. That's it, nothing else. So earlier it was just having a web. Now we added the Spring Boot starter. Okay, once I've added it, I will just restart my application. And here you can see that my application is started, right? Started Spring Boot security. Now what I will do is I'll go to the browser again, and I will go to the localhost 8080 and I will refresh again. And you can see that we have a complete working login functionality. Okay, you can see that we have not done anything yet, right? But now we have a completely working login page. Now once I got this login page, I do not know what is the username and password for this, right? So what we should do, how we should log in, if I give anything, all the random username password, it will not be able to log in because it is checking against some data as well, right? So that means there is some username and password available which I will feed in to log into the system. So what will be the username and password? So ideally by default the username in Spring security is user. So what I will do is I will give the user as the default username, but password I don't know. So if you want to know the password, default password, if you go to the IntelliJ IDEA console, okay, here you can see that you have the log, that is this is a generated password, is for development use only. Okay, and if you scroll up, you can see there is a password using generated security password. Okay, so this password is been generated by Spring security. So once we use this password, and if I pass this password here and if I sign in, you can see that now I'm able to sign in and I am getting welcome to daily code buffer. So now once it is signed in, if I go to localhost 8080 again, it should not ask me about the credentials. It should be directly logged in, right? So you can see that I'm able to log in directly here. Okay, so it says welcome to daily code buffer. Now if I go to Postman, let's see how it behaves. So if I go to Postman and if I hit localhost 8080 and if I hit send, you can see that I'm getting 401 unauthorized because I'm not logged into the system. I need to log in, so I should be adding the credentials here as well to log in to access this API. So what I will do is I will go to the authorization, I will add the basic authentication here, and let me just add username as user and password as whatever I'm getting here. Okay, and if I hit send, you can see that I'm able to log in, getting 200 OK, and it is saying me welcome to Daily Code Buffer. So you can see that I have a complete working login functionality. And if I want to log out as well, so if I go, you can see that it is working fine. But if I say /logout, and you can see that it is asking me to log out. Are you sure you want to log out? If I say log out, you can see that I'm logged out now. And if I go back to 8080, it will ask me to log in again. So you can see that login and logout functionality is completely working fine. But how it works, right? We need to understand this. Like, okay, by just adding the Spring Security dependency, I have now complete functionality with UI, with login functionality that it gives me out of the box. So let's understand how completely this thing works, and then we will understand about the how this particular session maintained within the Spring Security as well. Now in the previous section of the video, we saw that we completely implemented the Spring Security. We were able to get the login page, and we were able to do the logout page as well. So it was completely working. Once we are able to log in, then only we were able to log into the system, we're able to access our resources. Otherwise, we were getting 401 unauthorized access. Now how everything works. So what we did was we had an actor here, client, okay, which was able to access the API, which was the get/API, which was the welcome message, right? Welcome API. So this is what it was added. So this was something that we were able to access. Okay, but after adding the Spring Security, from going this API access to directly accessing this, we had a controller that was the welcome controller. Okay, so before calling this, there will be something which invoked the Spring Security for us, right? So what happens is, before user calls the get API from the welcome controller, there is something which is handling complete login functionality. So generally in Spring, what happens is, how Spring will understand that whenever I call /API, there must be welcome controller called. Okay, so for that there is a dispatcher servlet. There is an API that is a front controller. So this is a front controller. Okay, front controller. So this front controller, what it will do is, this is called a dispatcher servlet. Okay, so this dispatcher servlet, what it will do is, it will get all the API requests, and it will identify that, okay, if it is get of /, then where it should send to. Okay, it's gets of /, then it should send to welcome controller. Suppose if it is get of /product, then if I have already defined product controller which has /product API registered, then it will send that request here. Okay, so this front controller, which is our dispatcher servlet, will handle all the requests, and it will send the request to the particular controllers. Okay, now before the request comes to dispatcher servlet, that okay, which API should be sent to where, there is one more layer before that, that is your interceptors. Okay, that is your filters. Okay, like how my request should be filtered. So there is a filter section here. So this is called a filter. So there will be different filters available. Filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, and so many different filters are there. So your request will go here, and it will go through all those filters available, and it will perform all the different operations based on that filter should be applied or not. It will decide with all those filters. So as there is a lot of filter, it is called a filter chain. Okay. So there is a complete filter chain. So your request will go through your entire filter chain. It will apply all those different filters which needs to be applied. And then your request will go to this, your front controller, that is your dispatcher servlet. It will decide to which particular controller your request should go to, and your request will be served here. Okay. So now within this filter chain, there is a filter that is for Spring Security. That is your security filter. Okay. So there is a security filter chain which will handle all your security things. There are different kinds of filters also available which we can configure to, but there is a security filter which will do all those things. So what it will do is it will check that, okay, if the request is coming, if that request is authorized and authenticated, if so, then only your request should go to the next point, okay, to the front controller, and your request should be allowed. If not, then from here only your request will be rejected and response you will get as a 401 unauthorized. So this is where your filter chain will come into place with all those different filters, and it will identify what is something happening here. Okay. So your login, your logout, your all the different URLs, everything is handled using this filter chain. Okay. So this is how internally complete your Spring Security works at the different layers for your configurations, for your APIs to work securely. Now if we want to do anything within this Spring Security, then this is the point that we have to configure if we want to do anything differently. Now, as we understood how that complete architecture is, how your security and how your filter chain works, let's go back and understand how your sessions are maintained within your Spring Security. So in the previous video, we saw how the entire Spring Security is working, what is the different layer, and how your request traverse through to make sure that you are authenticated to get into the system. So what we will do is we will understand how the session is maintained. Okay. So here you can see that whenever I hit this API, that is the localhost 8080, it asks me for the credentials, right? So what I need to do is, let me just log into this, that is a user. Okay. And the password I have is this one. So I just take this password, I'll give the password here, and I'll click on sign in. So here you can see that I'm getting welcome to daily code buffer. So this is something that I'm able to log in. Now if I continue to do this request here you can see that I'm always doing the same request. So that means my system knows that, okay, I am already logged in, so I should not ask the credentials again. So how does the system knows, right? So for this, there is a session ID. So if I go to inspect element here, and if I go to console, and if I hit this API, and here within this API, and if I go to cookies, here you can see that there is a JSession ID and there is some value to it. Okay. Now this value, you can see that it is stored within the cookie within the browser itself. So I can understand that, okay, I was able to log in and this is a session ID for it. So with this session ID, if there is a again request, then I should not be logging in again, as I have already created the session, right? So this session identifies that, okay, user is authenticated and it has the access to come to the system. And if I am able to have this value, pass this value back to the request with this details, then system will understand that, okay, this user is authenticated. This is the value for that session ID. And for this session ID, I already have everything which I needed. So I will tell that, okay, this user is authenticated. I will not do anything. I will skip my entire filter chain, whatever the security filter chain is there. And I'll just send the request to the dispatcher servlet, which will handle everything for me. That's awesome, right? So you can see that once and only once I'm able to log in, and then with this session value, my session is staying here until this session expires. Okay. So this is how your session is maintained here with this session ID. Now, this session ID value will change based on the different user logged in with the different system. So your session ID value with this Chrome browser is different than what you log in from your Safari browser or you log in from your Postman, because that session ID value will refer to that particular session within that client itself. So Chrome is one client, Postman is another client, Safari is another client. So all those three clients will have the three different session IDs. So this is how complete session is maintained within your browsers, and how with this session ID you will be able to log in to the system itself. Now in this section, let's create a couple of more APIs and understand how those API will also behave with this login functionality. So what we will do is we'll create a new API to get the products and save the products. So let's implement that. So what we will do is we will come to our IntelliJ IDEA and let's create one more controller and we'll say product controller. Okay, so we've created a product controller within the controller package, and here I'm going to say this is my REST controller, and I'm going to say request mapping, and I'm going to say /products. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to get the product. Currently I want to get the product from the database, but I do not have the database, so I will just mimic that with a list here. Okay, so let me just create a class here, create a record which can hold the product. So what I will do is I will create private record product which has integer product ID, string product name, and double price of the product. Okay, and here you can see that this is your record created. So now you can use this record product to get and fetch the data. Okay, so now here what I need a list of product which is products equals to new array list, and I can say list.off. I can create the products here, so I can say new product. I can pass value 1, I can pass iPhone, and the value is 999.0. I'll just copy this and I will say Mac Pro, and the value is 2099.0. Okay, so here you can see that I have just created a list of products which I can use. Consider this as my data. So now what I'll do is I'll create an API which is public, which will send list of product, which is get products API, and which is going to return products. Okay, this is a simple thing, and this is going to be a post mapping. Okay, so here you can see that it's a simple API that I want a list of products to be sent back, and what I did is I just created a list here which has two products available, that is iPhone and Mac Pro. That's it. Okay, and what I will do is I'll create one more API. Sorry, this should be your get mapping. What am I doing, guys? Okay, now I'll create one more API to add the product as well. Okay, so let me just create an API which is public, which will return product and say save product. Okay, this is going to be a post mapping, and what I will do is I will take the product here, and this product is my request body. Okay, so I'm taking a product as an input from a JSON, and then what I'm doing is I'm adding that in the products. So I'm taking the products.add, and here I'm gonna add that product, and I'm gonna return that product back. Okay, simple thing. You can see that I have created two APIs, that is one get product which will get me all the products, and you can see that one product which is save product. Okay, that is saving the product. Okay, that's it. What I will do is as we have two new APIs, let's start our application and let's see how this two works. So my application is started. I have the password now and the user will be user. Okay, that's great. So what I will do is I will take this password here. I will go to the postman, and rather than 8080 here, what I will do is I will say I need product. Okay, it's in get API. If I do with no auth and if I hit send, you can see that I'm getting 401 unauthorized. So that means I do not have access to this API. Okay, which is what we expected. Now if I pass the basic authentication, user as user and password as new password, and if I hit send, you can see that now I'm getting two records, that is iPhone and Mac Pro. So that means that this credential is completely working fine and I'm getting success as well. So now what I will do is, with the same details, I will just copy this because I want to now use the post API. So with the same thing /product, I will just change to post and I'll go to body raw JSON and I'll pass the body, and let me just beautify it. I'll pass the value as 3. I want to add iPad with 599.0. Okay, so now this is what I want to add. I have already added the authorization, user and password, and let's hit send. Okay, and it didn't work, right? You can see that I added the username correct, I added the password also correct. It's complete basic authentication, and if I go back to configuration, you can see that there is nothing wrong. I did a post mapping, that is a get mapping. Everything is working completely fine, but you can see that whenever I'm hitting post, this is not working. So if I change to get, you can see that it is working. If I change to post, it is not working, right? So why that? So let's understand this, why this is happening. This is because of the CSRF. So let's understand CSRF in the next video. So in the previous video, we saw that we implemented two APIs, that is the get product and save product. And with this Spring Security, we were able to execute the get product successfully. But when we were trying to do save product, we were getting 401 unauthorized access, right? So we need to understand why that. So that is because of the CSRF. CSRF stands for cross-site request forgery. Let's understand what it is. So which means that suppose I have the API that is /product, which is a get API, and I have post API to do the same thing, that is the product, to save the data. Okay, now what happens is these two are available from where, or now these two are the API, right? These two API can be accessed from the resource, right? So these two can be accessed via resource URL. Now from where the request comes here, that depends, right? So suppose I have the client here. Okay, so this is your client, and from this browser the request comes. Okay, suppose I'm at Chrome. Okay, request came here. What happens is request came here and then request created. Okay, and the login page was added, that okay, you are not logged in, so you log into the system. Okay, we logged in, we passed the username and password, and with username and password, what happened is it created the session ID, and this session ID was stored in my Chrome browser or whatever the client it is, and then for the next request, the session ID was passed as the input to get me this data. So your system was able to understand that okay, whatever the session ID was there, we have that resource available. Okay, so with this session ID, your system was able to authenticate you and you were getting the data. Now as the session ID is available within your browser, some hacker can steal it. Okay, and this happens. Okay, suppose your hacker has steal your session ID, and if hacker is sending that session ID as an input to get the same resource, then your system should not allow, right? So what happens is I took the session ID, hacker took the session ID, and that session ID they passed along with the same request, then your system does not understand that, okay, from where this request came, right? Because I have the session ID and this session ID is a valid session ID. So your system will understand, okay, I have a session ID which is authenticated. Let's give the data back. Awesome, right? So now your hacker can get your data and can modify your data as well. Okay. So to prevent this, this is called a CSRF attack, that is a cross-site, because it is doing the same request from a different site. So that's why it's a cross-site request forgery, because it is forging the request that we have. Okay. Now to handle this, what happens is there is a CSRF token also created alongside the session ID. Okay. So whenever the session ID is created, there is a CSRF token created alongside this, and this CSRF token is also available as a hidden variable to the system. And using this hidden variable, whenever you do a request back, it checks, okay, if that hidden variable is available or not. And if that hidden variable is available, you can allow that request. If that is not available, you will not allow. Or if that particular hidden variable is passed as a header input. So suppose whenever you are logged in, this token is created and this token is available. Okay, so I just created this token and this token is available. Now what will happen is this token should be passed back whenever you are accessing the request. So what Spring does is, okay, Spring says that, okay, for GET request we are fine, because okay, they are just accessing your resources with the CSRF. But when they are trying to modify your data with all the post, put and delete, at that time, if your Spring security is added, then your CSRF token is mandatory. So Spring security says that, okay, when we logged into the system with just session ID, it gave me all the data. But when we tried to save using a post request here, right, it told that you are unauthorized, because this request when we did, there is no CSRF token which was already generated. So Spring security said that, okay, you did the request, I have your session ID, but I do not have your CSRF token, because without CSRF token I cannot validate that the request is originated from the same client or not. Okay, so that is not able to authenticate it, so that's why this request is failing. So now we need the CSRF token to make sure that whenever I am doing post request or any request which changes your data, to make sure it is handled correctly, right? So for that I need a CSRF token. How do I get the CSRF token? Okay, so if you want to see the CSRF token to make sure that we are able to do this request, if I come here, okay, and if I do logout, okay, and if I do logout here, you can see in the response, you will be able to see that there is a CSRF token. You can see that there is an input field which name is underscore CSRF, and there is a value to it, and this is a hidden field. So whenever you are submitting back the request, you can see that whenever you are submitting the request, this is a form, right? So when you submit this form, you're passing this value, and then your request will be handled correctly. Without this, your request will not be handled. Okay, so this CSRF token is needed. So how do we get it? So let's create the API which can pass the CSRF token, and with that CSRF token we get the request which we can handle. Okay, so let's implement CSRF token in the next video. In the previous section we saw that what is CSRF token and what is the importance of CSRF token and how to handle the request. In this video let's implement that CSRF token, how to get that CSRF token and how to pass that CSRF token. Okay, so what we will do is let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's implement the CSRF token, how to get it. I'll go to the IntelliJ IDEA. Let me just go to the welcome controller, and here let's implement it. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create a new API that is public, and I'll say that I need CSRF token. Okay, so here you can see that it's a CSRF token part of the Spring Security Web. So I'll just take the CSRF token and I say get token. Okay, and what I will do is I will do this as a get mapping, and I'll say CSRF. So whenever I'll hit CSRF, I should get the token. Okay, now how should I get the token? As we saw in the diagram that this CSRF token will be generated as a part of the request, right? So it should be part of the request. So I can inject that HTTP request and I can extract from the request. So I'll just do HTTP servlet request. You can see that this is a part of the Jakarta servlet HTTP, right? So I'll just add this request here, and what I will do is I will do request dot get attribute, because that was the attribute in the request. And what was the attribute? If I come here, it was /CSRF, right? So I'll just copy this, and this is what I need. Okay, and I want to return this value. Now as this is a CSRF token, I need to cast to CSRF token. Okay, so you can see that that's it. I'm just taking the value from _CSRF from the request and I'm passing back the value. This value will only be available once you are authenticated, right? And when you are hitting this API, you must be authenticated, correct? So let's restart our application and let's see how this works. So let me just restart my application. Okay, my application is restarted. So what I need to do is I need to get the password here, and what I need to do is I need to go to the Postman, and what I will do is let me just create a new request here, same localhost 8080/CSRF. Okay, so this is what I need. So let me just send the request, and you can see that this is unauthorized, right? Because I cannot get the CSRF token without authenticating. So what I will do is I'll go to the authorized section, I'll go to the basic auth. I have the user as a username and password as this new password which was generated. So now once I hit the send request, here you can see that I have the token generated. The hidden name is this, the parameter is this. So that means that my token is generated. So let me just copy that token. So I can use this token anywhere whenever I am hitting the request, right? So if I go to this post request, okay, let me just first do the get here. Okay, so if I do the get here with basic authentication, if I hit send, you can see that I'm not getting data because I need to change the password. So let me just change this password, and if I hit send, you can see that I'm getting data. So this is successful. Now if I do post request with the same data, I'm getting 401 unauthorized, right? Because I do not have access to do this request. So what I need to do is I need to pass this CSRF token, because as we discussed here, that whenever you're doing this post request, right, post, put, delete, whatever it is, if it's changing your data at that time, your CSRF token is needed to make sure that the request is from the same source, same origin, not the different sources, right? So that's why what we have to do is we already have the CSRF token. This is how we get the CSRF token from this API. I got this entire token. Let me just copy this. I'll go to this post request, and within header attributes, I'll pass the value. I'll pass the value against what? Against this header name. You can see that it's giving header name, that is XCSRF-token. So I'll just pass this value here as a header. So now what I'm doing is, whenever I'm hitting the request, I am authorizing it, okay, with username and password. So the session ID is there, and also I'm passing the token as well. So this token says that this request is from the same client, because from this client only this token was created, not from the other client. So now once I pass this to the post request, I should be able to get the data. You can see that now I got the 200 request with the new product which I already added, and if I do get again, I should be getting that new product. You can see that now I'm getting 3 products, right? So you can see that this way I was able to add the product and I was able to invoke the post APIs with the CSRF token. So this is how you will get the CSRF token from your credentials using the CSRF attributes, and within the header, that is X CSRF token, you should pass on the request to pass on the values to get you the data, to make sure that Spring Security is happy with your CSRF token. So this is how you make sure that your CSRF security is been handled. Now Spring Security also has a way to completely disable it, but that is the another topic where we can do the configuration. But this is the primary requirement, that if you are doing just get, it allows you without CSRF token, but if you are doing any other operation, your CSRF token is required. And this is how we generate the CSRF token and the significance of CSRF token. Now in the previous section of the video, we understand that how to implement CSRF token, how to get the CSRF token and pass that token alongside your request to get you the data. So this is all we implemented and it is completely working fine. But alongside that, whatever we did was with basic authentication, where we passed the password which was generated by Spring Security, and the username was user. But I do not want that. I want my username and password, right? How do I do that? So let's go and implement how do I add my custom username and password within the Spring Boot application. So it is really simple. These are just a couple of properties where we can add those and you will be able to generate this. So what I will do is I will go to the IntelliJ IDEA, and then what I will do is I'll go to the application.properties, and here I can add properties where I can define everything. So here you can see that these are the 2 properties that I've added, that is spring.security.user.name and spring.security.user.password. So with these 2 properties, we are defining that what should be my user and what should be my password to log into the system. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to give username as Shabir and password as password. Okay, so now what I did is I told Spring Security that you don't generate your password and your default username is not user. This is what you should configure a system with, and whenever there's a request, you authorize or authenticate that request along this credentials. That's what we are telling Spring Security now. Okay, so now currently you can see that till now it was generating the password, okay, for us. Now let's restart our application. It should not generate the password for us because we have already provided those details. So now you can see that as I've restarted my application, I cannot see the password ever generated from the Spring Security. You can see that this is Spring Security, and you can see that your global authentication manager is configured with UserdetailService with bean name in memory UserdetailS manager. Okay, so you can see that there is a UserdetailS manager class that is in memory because we have passed the in memory data here, and based on these details your Spring Security will be configured and authenticate data against it. So now if I go back to the browser and if I say okay, I want product, so what it will do is it will ask me to log in. So if I use user, that's fine, but I do not have password, so I cannot log in with user and password. So what I have to do is I have to log in with Shabir, which is my username, and password is password. So once I do, it says bad credentials because I must have given it wrong. So I'll just copy this. It's Shabir, password is password, and login. You can see that I'm able to log in correctly, and I see I have 2 records available. Okay, same thing I can do over here. I can go to Postman, I can do get request with basic authentication. Rather than Shabir, I can pass, rather than user, I can pass Shabir, and the password should be password. Okay, and once I hit send, you can see that I'm authenticated and I'm getting data. If I pass anything else, it should fail with 401. So you can see that now your all the authentications are authenticated against this particular details, and this is done based on the in-memory authentication that we have done. So this is how you will be able to change your username and password for your authentication. Now this is just a single password. We might have to use the list of all the different users because different users can authenticate with their credentials that we are going to implement in the later part of the video. Now till the previous section of the video, we understood that how we were able to authenticate to a system, how CSRF token works, and how we can change our credentials so that we can pass our own username and password, and your Spring Security will connect to that username and password. And all those things you can see that we happens using this filters, right? So there is a filter. Using that filter, your authentication has been authenticated and your request is passed. But what are the different components involved using that filters? We need to understand that so that we can make sure that we are able to implement the authentication from the vast user list that we have from our database, right? So if we are planning to implement authentication from our database, we need to understand few components, few classes, how that works. We understood that using this filter, everything works, that there is a filter that does everything, but which filter and what we need to configure, that we need to understand completely. So with the same details here, with filters, let's understand more what that thing happens or how that works internally. Now, as we understood earlier that this is your application, this is my application, and this application has all your controllers, your app controllers, okay? So this is all your app controllers. So any request coming to app controllers will come by your filter chains, okay? So your request coming here and your response going back, request, response, this is your client. So, and the request comes here, okay? So any request, this, let me just draw some filters here, okay? My drawing is really bad, but let's understand from here that any request response going to your app controllers, either it is your /welcome controller, product controller, add product, whatever it is, to go to that, you need to go towards the filter first. Now within this filter, your authentication, your security is been handled by your authentication filter, okay? Now this authentication filter has the security context. So this authentication filter will have the context which can understand that, okay, do this particular user, when the request comes, that request was already authenticated or not, if that needs to be authenticated or not, everything has the context to it. So your authentication filter will have that context, so that based on that context it can decide what to do. Now this authentication filter talks to authentication manager because someone needs to manage your authentication, right? So there is an authentication manager. So this authentication filter will talk to your authentication manager, and this authentication manager will decide that whatever the credential that you pass, those are correct or not, okay? So this is your guy, this is the class that talks to everything, talks about, okay, whatever the request is there, that is correct or not, okay? So this is what we important for us, okay? That there is an authentication filter. This authentication filter has a context which talks to the authentication manager, which decides that the user is valid or not. This authentication manager talks to authentication provider, because there must be different providers, right? Because this provider depends on how your application works. Currently we have seen that we have just passed username and password. That is your in-memory authentication provider, because that data is taken from your in-memory caching. But if I want to get the data from database, then that will be a authentication provider, that is a DAO authentication provider, right? So there are different providers, and based on that providers, it decides how to get the data. So your manager talks to the provider like, okay, there must be provider which is giving me some data. So your manager will talk to provider, and then the provider will talk to something to get the data. Now this authentication provider will talk to two things. One is your password encoder, and one is user details service. So it will talk to two things, that my provider has to know that I have username and password. Okay, so whatever the username that we have passed here from your authentication manager to your authentication provider, and those username will be passed to user details service. Okay, now user details service has a method that is a get by username. So this username will be passed against a database. This is a DB. Okay, from that DB it will get the user, and this user, once you take, you will also get your username, password, and all those details. If the user is expired or not, user is valid or not, all those details we have in the DB. And with get by username, you will be able to get all the records. Now alongside that, I have password encoder to identify how I have encoded the password. Is my password in plain text directly I have stored, or do I have encoded or encrypted in any other format or not? That will be maintained by your password encoder. So authentication provider will have password encoder and a user details service to get those two details, and then it will validate that whatever the username and password that I have passed, those two match or not. If those two match, then authentication manager will tell the filter and update the security context that okay, this user is valid, you can allow this request, and then the request will be passed here and the response will be sent back. Okay, if it is not valid, then it will say that okay, the request is not valid, and the response directly will be sent from here. It will not pass through this. Okay, so this way the entire function works, the entire architecture works. So whenever we are working with the users and we want to pass the custom logic to get the users, what we need to make sure that is that if I have to change the filter, then this is the filter that we should look for. This is how the security filter chain will work. And if I want to change the provider, so I need to implement this service. Okay, that how I should get my user, I should implement this, how my password should be encoded, and I should provide the DO as well, like how my data will be provided. I need to provide this three and this as well, like how your authentication will work. So this four things has to be configured so that you can get the data from the DB. So make sure that you define authentication manager, you define the provider, like who is providing you the data, and you define your user details service from where you are getting the user data and how you are encoding the password. Okay, so this details you need to configure within the system to make sure that your authentication works. Don't worry about anything, just focus on this part, that once you define these things, you do not have to worry about anything else later. Okay, so this is the complete structure that we need to make within our system to make sure everything works correctly. Now in the previous section of the video, we understood that how we can plug in the different components within the system to make sure that how we can get the custom data or custom authentication with Spring Boot. But before that, before we implement the custom authentication against the database, we need to understand how we can do the custom configuration for our Spring Security itself. Currently, whatever we see, we have not done any configuration. Everything is out of the box, right? So let's understand how to do the custom configuration within the Spring Boot. Currently, if I go to the browser, okay, currently you can see that I'm able to get the product data. So I was able to log in. Now if I do log out, I'm able to log out as well. I can log out and I can log in again. You can see that this everything works out of the box with auto configuration. Now let's add this configuration one by one so that we can understand how this configuration works, and then we will add the user configuration to get the data from DB. So what we will do is, to add the configuration, we have to add the configuration class. So let me just go here, create a package that is config, and within this config, let's add the configuration. So I'll create a class and I will just name it as web security config. Okay, so here what I will do is I'll do two things here. That I will add this as a configuration because this is a configuration class, and what I will do is I will say enable web security. Okay, so with these two details, you can see that once I add enable web security, what it will do is it will import the classes which is needed. You can see that web security configuration, Spring Web MVC importer, Auth 2 importer. So all these classes by default it imports to make sure that we have enabled the authentication. Otherwise you have to add those classes whatever we need. Okay, so as now we are taking the control back to us rather than giving entire control to Spring Security, we have to do everything what we need. So let's do that. So now to take the control back, how do we get the control back? So we understood that everything works within the filter chain, and we understood that there is a security filter chain. If we plug in there, then we can get all the things done, right? So there are different filters available. Those filters works in a filter chain, and with that filter chain I can plug in something so that I'll be able to do something. So for that, what I will do is I will plug in a filter chain. So I'll just define public security filter chain. So here you can see that this is a security filter chain. So I'll just define security filter chain, and I can say it's a security filter chain, and this I'm defining as a bean. So now, as there was already security filter chain available by default configuration, now I'm taking that control back and I'm defining my own security filter chain. Okay, so if you go to the security filter chain, you can see that if whatever the request we do, we matches that request and we give the filters. So if we go to the implementation of this, you can see that there is a filters added and request matches and everything. Okay, so how your request should be handled and everything, all the different methods are available. So now how do we get the security filter chain? So that can be taken with the HTTP security. Okay, so what I will do is I will inject HTTP security. Okay, so now with HTTP security, you can see there are different methods. Okay, so here you can see that there is a add filter before, CSRF, HTTP basic, form logic, authorize HTTP request, and all these different methods, authentication manager, authentication provider, all these things we saw, right? That what all things that we can configure. We can configure manager, provider, different filters and everything. Okay, so now with this HTTP security, we are taking the control. So what we can do is we can return HTTP security dot build. You can see that HTTP security dot build is sending the default security filter chain, and that's what we need, security filter chain, right? So I'll just use this, and if I don't pass anything by default, you can see we need to add the exception. Let's add it. So now by default I can inject HTTP security. From that HTTP security, it is building the security filter chain and defining a bean. Okay, so now if I run my application, let's see what all things works. Okay, so now you can see that I got the logs. I'm not sure if I got the password or not. Nope, so nothing is there. Okay, so now if I go back to my browser and if I hit localhost 8080, you can see that I can log into the system. Okay, if I go to incognito mode as well, you can see that I'm able to directly hit this request as I do not have any authentication added. Okay, so it is bypassing every authentication it has and it is giving me data because I have taken the control back here. Okay, I have taken the control back and without doing anything I'm just returning my security filter chain. So now if I want my request to be authenticated, I need to add the authentications here. Okay, so let's do that. So now what I'm doing is I am telling HTTP security that you should authorize all HTTP requests. Okay, and I'm telling that your request, this is the customizer it is taking. Okay, and I'm telling that whatever the request it is, so I'm telling that request dot any request. Okay, whatever the request comes should be authenticated. That's it. Okay, I'm simply telling that I am adding the HTTP security and authorize HTTP request. So here you can see that what it is doing is it is taking the authorize HTTP request configurer, okay, and it is adding that customization. So I told that any request coming in, any request should be authenticated. So now it is adding username and password authenticator to make sure all the requests are authenticated. So now if I restart my application, okay, my application is restarted. Now what I'm doing is I'll go back and I will hit the API, and here you can see that I got access to localhost was denied. So that means I'm getting HTTP 403 error. But earlier what used to happen was, earlier whenever this was the case, it used to show the login page, right? For me, it is throwing the error that, okay, you are not authorized to log in, but how should I log in? That is not happening, right? So I should be adding some configuration so that I can get that authentication page as well, right? So let's add that as well. So what I can do now is I can say that, okay, now all the requests are authenticated. So alongside that, add the HTTP basic authentication as well. And I can say with default customizer. So you can see that there's a method customizer dot with defaults. So I can say that add the default authentication. So give me a default basic HTTP authentication. Okay. So two things I added. One is you should authenticate all the requests first of all. How should I authenticate? With basic HTTP. Okay. Let's restart our application. So my application is restarted now. Let's go back to the browser, and if I hit 8080, you can see that this is a basic authentication it gave me. There is no username, password, anything. With a fancy page, it's just a pop-up, right? So if I give Shabir and password as password, you can see that it is able to log in. Okay, so at least there is a simple authentication available, nothing fancy. If you want something fancy, we can do configuration for that as well. But this is the basic thing. Now, if I want that form login rather than that pop-up login, I can do that as well. So for that, what I can do, I can say that I want form login. I can say form login, and I can say that this also you give me with default configuration. I don't want to do anything fancy. So if I restart this, okay, my application is restarted. If I go back and if I hit 8080 again, it's already logged in. That's good. You can see that it came with a form now rather than pop-up, right? So now if I do Shabir and password, I should be able to log in. So here you can see that one by one we are adding steps within our filter chain to make sure that our security is working as expected. Now let's add one more thing. So currently we also talked earlier about CSRF, right? So what we can do is we can enable or disable the CSRF as well. So what we can do with CSRF, you can see that with CSRF, we can give customizer what default values. So it will be with default configurations, how Spring needs. But if you want to disable, as earlier I talked, like you can disable as well. So what you can do, you can say CSRF and CSRF, okay, CSRF, and I can say CSRF dot disable. So now your CSRF is disabled. So for your post put request also, there will be no authentication that you need to pass CSRF token. But if you go with default config like customizer dot with defaults, then it will have that default behavior as well. So this is how you can configure differently for your different configurations. Okay, so this is the basic that I wanted to share with you, like how you will be able to take control of your filter chain and you will add all the different configuration within it. So with this default configuration, now we have a basic Spring security application working where the credential has been asked to log into a system. There is a logout functionality, and if you're logged in, then only your request will be authenticated, and this is for all the requests. So now we have a complete control of our Spring security application. So till now what we have seen is we have a user with which we can log into our Spring Boot application. So that user we have defined here within our Spring application.properties file. Here you can see that it is a username Shabir and user password as password that we have defined, and we can only log in to our system using these credentials. We are not able to log into our application using any other credentials. So what if I have to have a sets of different user with which I can log into my application? The best way is to store all the records in the database, and with all the username and password, we match those records with the database and allow a user to log into the system. But let's go step by step. Let's understand a system where we define a user detail service as we have defined here. Right? Here you can see that we have added a user detail service which can handle based on the authentication manager and the authentication provider, right? So let's define a user detail service which has a bunch of records available, bunch of users, and with which we can log into a system. So what we will do is, as user detail service has the method that is get by username, what we'll do is we'll define a bean of it, which means we will take the control of this user detail service. Currently everything is auto configured, so we are taking control one by one. Okay, we already took the control of the application filter, that is the authentication filter. Now let's take the control of user detail service where we'll define the bunch of users in a static manner. We'll just create the object where we'll define the different users. We are still not connecting to the database. Okay, and we will also define the password encoder as well, and then this will connect to the authentication manager, which will manage the authentication for us. Okay, that's what we are trying to do here. So let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA, and what we'll do is we'll go to the web security config where we are defining the configuration for our Spring security, where we have already defined the security filter chain. Now let's define the user detail service. So what I will do is I will define a method which will return the user detail service. So user details service, this is the interface. Okay, and I'm going to define user detail service, and this is going to be my bean which we are defining. So now if you check here this user detail service, okay, this user detail service is an interface. Okay, this interface requires only one read-only method which simplifies support for new data access strategies. So you can see there is one method that is load user by username, which takes username as an input and gives the user details as the data back. Okay, so that means that as we have defined user detail service, we need to return the user details. So we need to get the object of user details. So let's see what are the different implementations. So here you can see that there are different implementations of this user detail service. So what we will do is we can use any of the implementation. Let's use this in-memory user details manager here. Okay, so here you can see that this is the in-memory user details manager which has already implemented all the different methods. So what we will do is when we create the object of user details service, as is the interface, we cannot create the object of it. So what we will do is we will create the object of in-memory user details manager, which will have all the different methods of the user for getting the username, password, changing the password, is user active or not, all those details are available, all those methods are available which will help us to authenticate a user. Okay, all these methods are available, so we do not have to worry about anything. We just have to provide the object. And what we need to provide? We need to provide a user details. Okay, so what we will do is we'll go to the web security config where we have defined the user details service, and here let's try to create the object of user details. So we'll define user details. Okay, and I'll define which user details I want Shabir. So I can define what is the user details. If you go to user details, okay, this has the different details. So user details is an interface which has what? Password, username, is account non-expired, blah blah blah. All the different methods are there, and this has been implemented by what? Different user. Okay, so mutable user details, and user. So what we'll do is we will use this user to create the object of user details. Okay, so here you can see that this is the class user which implements user details and which has a different values. So what we'll do is we'll create the object of user, pass all these values. So that means I have created a user details, and that user details will be handled by my user details service. Okay, so what we are doing here is we are creating a user details service which can be handled by the authentication manager here. So let's go back to the IntelliJ idea. Let's go to the web security config, and I can say I need the user details object, and the implementation of is from the user object. So here you can see that the user object is from the security.core.userdetails, and I can use the with user name method, that is the I can pass the username, that is Shabir dot password. I can pass the password, that is suppose password, and I can pass the roles because I need to pass the roles as well. So I'm passing the roles as a user. This roles is important when we have to identify or when we have to define that what is the role of the user. Suppose if we have multiple roles, suppose users, admins, then guest. So based on the different types of the roles, you define the different APIs and the access levels. That's where this roles is defined. So currently I'm allowing access to each and everyone, but we can have the filters based on the roles as well. As I'm defining roles as user, everyone with a user will be able to access it. Okay, that's what we are defining. So I'm defining roles and then I'm building the object. Okay, so here you can see that with this information, I have created a user details of Shabir. Let's create one more thing. Let's create one more for maybe Nikhil. Another user, I can define Nikhil here, and the password is suppose Nikhil, and I am building the user. So two users are there. Now what I have to do is I have to create the object of user details service. Okay, now user details service can be created using the return new in memory user details manager. Okay, and this you can see that there should be an interface. Sorry, there should be a constructor which takes the data. Okay, here you can see that there is a constructor in memory user details manager which is taking the collection. So I can pass multiple users here. So what I will do, I will pass Shabir and Nikhil. So you can see that my object of user details service is created and I have injected as well. So whenever there is a user been added or a user been trying to log in, the details will be provided from here. Okay, and what I will do is I will just comment this to properties because I do not want to use this. So I'll just comment this out and everything will be used from here. Awesome. So let's restart our application and let's see everything should be working from here. Okay, and your application is started. Okay, we can see that the application is started, port 8080. So what we will do is we will go to the browser, or rather we can go to the Postman as well. And what we will do is I want to call this product API with username Shabir and password is password. This is what we have defined in our application, right? Shabir and password. Now let's try to log in. And you can see that as I have already added the password correct and username correct, still I'm getting 401. Let's see what is the error. Okay, and here you can see that we have the error, and here you can see that we got the exception illegal argument and you have entered password with no password encoder. Okay, so this is what we were talking about here, that is the password encoder. So we need to mention what type of password encoder can be used to parse the data. As we have given password as a plain text, okay, we have not used any password encoder. Currently you can see that there is no password encoder, so that's why we got the exception as well, that there is no password encoder. Okay, and password is also plain text. So what I want to do is, I don't want to use any password encoder. I want to use a password encoder which will not convert my password to any encryption or encoded values. Okay, so for that there is a no op password encoder. Okay, so here if I see, this is a password encoder and here is a function that I need to pass. Okay, and okay, I'm just trying to show, this is the one, no op password encoder. Okay, here you can see that this is a password encoder. This is deprecated, but we are not going to use it. Okay, I'm just trying to define that how we can use this and how everything works. Okay, we should not be using this in the production application, this, but to use it, what I can do is, rather than giving it here, I can just define here as a no op. So what this is saying is that this is a no op password encoder. Okay, so internally what it will do is, it will check that this is the value added, so it will use that, okay, this is a no op password encoder added, so it means it has one password encoder which will convert this value into just password. Again, I'm telling this should not be used in production. This is just for learning purposes. We will actually convert this into a much better algorithm. Okay, so let's restart our application. Let's see how it works. Okay, so here you can see that your application is started. What we will do is, we'll go back to the Postman and we'll pass the username as Shabbir and password as password. That's it, and we'll click send. And here you can see that I was able to log in. I got 200 OK and I got the data as well. Now the other user was Nikhil, so I should be able to log in with Nikhil as well. So username is Nikhil, password is Nikhil, and if I hit send, you can see that we got 401 again, because for this user also we have not set the password encoder. So here as well we need to set the password encoder, that is no op. If I restart my application and if I re-log in with Nikhil user, then I should be able to get the data. As my application is restarted, let's go back to the Postman and let's hit the send, and you can see that the authentication is successful and I'm getting the data. So now what we have done is, we have implemented a user detail service and with in-memory authentication manager, which will work together as a custom data store to log into the system. So now what we have done is, we have provided a user detail service which has a bunch of users. Now from here I can add bunch of users, and with this user detail service I'll be able to log in. But as a production grade application, I should not be using this. I should be storing my data into database. So for that, what we need to implement is, we need to implement a registration and a login functionality. Okay, so let's implement registration and login functionality here. So in the previous section of the video, what we saw is, we saw the login functionality with the user detail service, where we implemented a custom user detail service with the in-memory user detail manager, that is the authentication manager for us, which is managing the authentication with the two users. Now we need to implement a registration and login API, which will connect to database so that I can register as many users I want and those users can log into my system. Okay, so for that, what we need to do is, we need to add the dependency of the database. In this application, we are going to use the MySQL database, so we need to add that configuration. So what I will do is, I will go to the browser, I will go to the Spring Initializer, and this is the project that we created. And here what I am going to do is, I'm going to add the Spring Data JPA dependency. This will allow us to use the Spring Data JPA with Hibernate to connect to my database. And I'm going to use MySQL driver. So as I'm going to use the MySQL database, I'm adding that particular driver. So once these two dependencies been added, go to explore section and copy those two dependency. One is this dependency, that is Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. Go back to the IntelliJ IDEA and go to pom.xml file and add that dependency. Then go back and copy the MySQL connector J dependency. So once these two dependencies been added, refresh your Maven project and you have the dependency of MySQL and your Spring Data JPA. So with these two dependency, we can connect to our database. Now to connect to the database, as we are using MySQL, you need to install MySQL in your machine. So I've already installed MySQL. So what I'll do is I'll show you. So I've already installed MySQL Workbench with MySQL Server. You can install the same. I will add the link in the description below for you to check how you can install the MySQL. It's really easy. It's just the installer and you need to install it. Once you install, you need to add your username and password as well to log into MySQL Server. So this is my MySQL Server, and if I log in here, you can see that I have a couple of databases available, AppDB and CricketDB, and we can create a new database here. Okay, so this is what we have added. Now what we need to add here is we need the few of the properties to define in my Spring Boot application to connect to the database. So let's add that as well. So to add those properties, what I need to do is I need to go to the application.properties, and here I can add the properties. So I'm adding few of the properties here. Okay, so these are the properties, that is Spring Data Source.url. So the URL of the database. So you need to add JDBC MySQL and the URL, that is localhost, and my DB is running on port 3306 and I want to connect to UsersDB. This is the database that I want to connect to. This database is not available. So I will copy this and I will go to MySQL and I will create the database. So I will create a schema here. I'll create a user schema, apply, and you can see that the schema is created. So now my application will be able to connect to this user schema. Okay, and then I have defined the Hibernate dialect, like which dialect I'm gonna connect to. So my dialect is org.hibernate.dialect MySQL dialect, as I'm using MySQL. And two properties that I've defined is the username and password of my database. So it's root and root. Whatever you have defined for your database, you have to mention it here. And then I've defined spring.jpa show SQL equals to true. So whatever the queries are getting executed with my application, those queries will be printed in the logs. That's what we have defined. And what we have defined, Spring JPA Hibernate data definition language auto equals to update. So whenever there is a change in my entities in my application, the same will be reflected in my database when I start my application. So suppose I'm creating one entity ABC, and if that ABC entity is not available in my database, that will create that entity in my database as well. That's what this property means. If you are not adding this property, that will not happen. You need to create it manually. Okay, this is all covered in a Spring Data and Spring Data JDBC section as well. So now once we have added these properties as well, okay, let's restart our application just to check that everything is working properly. And here you can see that everything is working properly, and you can see that my SQL dialect and Hikari pool is created, so I'm able to connect to my database as well. Okay, so everything is good. Now what we need to do is we need to create a registration API. Okay, so let's create a registration API. So for creating registration API, what we need to do is we need to create a controller first. So let's create a controller here. I'm going to come here and I'm going to define a Java class, and it says user controller. Okay, and this controller, I'm going to define this as a REST controller. And for this REST controller, what I need to do is I need to use one model as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an entity. Let me just create a package that says entity, and within this entity I'm going to create an entity called user, and this is going to be your entity, and what I need to do is I need to add few things, that is private integer ID, private string username, private string password. Okay, so three properties: ID, username and password. And for this ID, what I need to do is I need to annotate with @ID annotation, as this is my primary key. And for all this, I need to generate getters and setters. So I'm going to generate getters and setters for each and everything. Okay, so getters and setters are generated. So it's a normal simple entity class. Now for this entity class, what I need to do is I need to create the repository as well. So let's create the repository. So what I'll do is I'll create a new package called repository, and within this repository package I'm going to create a new Java class and say it's a user repository, and this is going to be the interface, and this extends JPA repository, and this is of type user from where daily code buffer.security.entity, because there is a user from Spring Framework as well. That's what we are not going to use it. We are going to use user. So this is a user and it's the ID type of integer, and we have to define repository. Okay, so your user repository is also defined. Now if I go to the controller, I am going to create a method that is public user, and this user is daily code buffer security entity user, which is what we want, and I want to register it, and this is going to be post request post mapping with the URL /register. Okay, and this is going to be taken as a request body. The entire user we are going to take. Okay, and what we are going to take is we will need the repository here, right? So what I will do is I will just take the object private user repository, and I'm going to create a final user repository. Okay, and let me just initialize using the constructor parameter. Okay, and what I will do is I am just going to define user repository dot save user. Okay, and I am going to return this. Okay, so here you can see that it's a simple method available, that is /register, and where I need to get the user which will save the data. Okay, simple thing. So here you can see that simple user controller with register method is created. So let's restart our application and let's see what's happening. So here you can see that the application is started. Okay, and here you can see that as we have created the entity, you can see that the table is also created, user table, where ID is there, password is there, and username is there. All the three fields are there. Okay, so my table is also created and application is also started. Now I need to register. So for that, what I can do is I need to go to the Postman, and what I can do, I can register here. So let me just create a new request here, and what I'll do, I will just do localhost /8080:8080 as a port and /user, and this is going to be my post mapping. And let me just copy this, come to here, the body section, raw JSON, and this is going to be your ID, username, password. So ID is 1, username is Shabir, password is password. Okay, so this is what I need, and I want to execute this request. So let's try to execute with send. And here you can see that I am not able to authorize this. Okay, because I need to pass the credentials. Now as I am trying to register a user, this API is not at all available, right? So I need to be register. Sorry. So let's do one thing. Let's do register and let's hit send, and still I'm getting 401 because I'm not authorized. So if I try to authorize here with basic authentication with nickel, let's see if it's working or not. It's working. I'm able to create the record, but the idea is I'm trying to register my system here, right? I'm trying to register. For registering, why do I need to log in first, right? Why do I need to pass username and password? I'm trying to register it first time. So for that, what I need to do is I need to bypass the system for this registration, right? When I'm doing register. So let's see how we can do this. So for that, what I can do is I can go to IntelliJ IDEA. I can go to web config, and within this web config, here what I have defined is that you authenticate all the requests. Here I can do something to make sure that whenever I'm doing /register, I'm not authenticated, right? So let's do that. So here what I will define is dot, I can do match the request. So that is a request matches attribute, and within this I need to pass the pattern. So here I'm defining that if any request is coming with register, then permit that. Rest everything should be authenticated. So simple thing that I've defined that for any request, if it's matching register, then permit, rest everything should be authenticated. Let's restart and check that for registration I should not be asked to log in now. So now as my application is started, I will go back to Postman, and what I will do is I will not pass any authentication, and this is still registration, and I am doing a post request here. Okay, and if I hit on send, you can see that it is allowing me to register. So now my registration API is working without me getting authenticated, because as I'm registering I should not be authenticated. Post that I should be authenticated. Okay, so this is what my API is, and this API is working. Now if I go and check in my database, table is created, and if I check the data, you can see that I have data available. Okay, as I was doing the save operation with the same ID, it is only one record available because it is doing update internally with same ID. Awesome. So my API is working. Now what I need to do is I need to have the login API as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement that as well. Now in the previous section of the video, we created a register API which the user is able to register to the system. Now let's implement the API to log in the user, to verify the user. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to go to IntelliJ IDEA, and we are going to go to the user controller. So let's go back to user controller. Okay, this is the register API. Let's create the API, that is public string, and this is a login API, and this login API is going to be again a post mapping, and this is going to be the /login API. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are going to add the request body as the input. Okay, we are going to take the entire user object, that is the username and password here, and we will take user as the input, and from here I need to check, or I need to verify a method. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to return success from here. Okay, that whatever the user details that I'm giving, if it is successful, if that user is available, then return success, otherwise failure. That's it, simple, right? So what I can do, if I directly give any user here, and if I directly return success, that would be success here. Okay, but what I want to do is if that user whatever the user I am passing, username, if that user is available in my DB, that I can say that okay, that user is available and return success. Okay, so I can say that I can define, if I go to user repository, right? So here I can define something. So here I can define that I need a user, and I can define find by username. Okay, and I can pass string username. Okay, so now what it will happen is I have implemented a method which will return me user. Okay, and if this user is available in DB, I can say that okay, that user is valid. Okay, so what I can do is I can go back to the controller. Okay, and here I can say that user repository dot find by username user dot get username dot, okay, and I can say variable user if you dot, okay, I can just say if objects dot is null, and I can pass u, and if it's not null, okay, then return success, else return failure. Okay, here you can see that it is a simple login method. We are just not doing anything, we are just checking that if that user is available in DB or not. Okay, so let me just authenticate here, restart my application, and let's try to log in here. Okay, so I'm gonna go to Postman. Okay, and what I will do is I will try to log in here rather than register. Okay, and what I will do is I will try to log into this system and hit on send, and I am getting 200 success, and it is saying that you log into this because by default, and you can see that I'm getting this entire page here now. So this is weird, right? So what I need to do is I need to make sure that I should not be getting this. Why with /login I'm getting this is because by default /login URL is the login page within the Spring Boot, okay, with Spring Security. So what I need to do is I need to go to the IntelliJ IDEA and go to web security config, and I need to remove this first of all because that's what /login page is getting for us. Okay, so now let's restart our application, and if I hit send again, and here you can see that that page is not coming, but I'm getting 401 unauthorized. But you need to understand that this login I'm trying to do to login, and that is not allowing me, then that's the problem. So like register, I need to bypass this login as well, because once I bypass login and then I give this username and password detail, then it should allow me, or that should authenticate me, and then rest of the API should work, right? So for this, what I will do is I will bypass login as well. So I'll define if it's login, bypass it. So let's restart. Okay, so now this is bypass, and if I hit send, here you can see that I'm getting success. If I pass anything else, I'm getting success because I'm not checking the password here, right? I'm just checking the username. So I'm just, if I change my username, you can see that it's failure, but if I pass the username correct, then it's successful. Okay, so now my at least API is working, register and login, but I need to make sure that the actual authentication happens. Okay, that's what we need to implement. In the next video, we will implement that as well. Now in the previous section of the video, we implemented the login API and we bypassed the login API at the time of authentication as well, because login API should work directly and post login as you're authenticated, rest of the API should work directly, otherwise they should fail. That's what the simple implementation should be. And for that, what we did was we bypassed the two URLs. If there is a register or login within the API itself, we are permitting those APIs. Rest of the APIs are getting authenticated. Okay. And what we also did is we created a user repository and a user controller which is handling these two requests. Now in the previous section, we understood that your user detail service was handling the data which has the get by username method. Okay. And it was checking in the DB. Now this user detail service interface is something that we injected here in the web security. Right, if you go here, this is what it is injected here, and it has couple of users. Now what I need is, rather than using this user details service and passing the in-memory user details manager, I want to actually connect to my database. So when I am doing registration, my data should register. Okay, and when I log in, this user details service should kick in and it should validate data against my database rather than this value, because I can currently log in with only these two records. I'm not able to log in with what I have added in my database. So let's implement that also. So for that, what I need to do is I need to have the implementation of user detail service. Okay. So first of all, what I will do is, let me just remove this. Okay. So that means now I do not have any user detail service. So I need to create one. So for that, what I will do is, let me just create a service package, and within this I'll just create custom user details service. Okay. Now this class is going to implement user details service. Simple, right? And we need to implement a method as well. So let's go ahead and implement a method, that is load user by username. Awesome, right? Now here, what I need to do is I need to load a user by username based on the username. Now I can load a user from my repository. So let's add the repository as well. So what I will do is I will define private final user repository. This is the interface that we created which will connect to my database. Okay, so this is my user repository and I need to inject it using the constructor parameter. So my user repository is here. Now I need to implement this method. So I have the username here. Okay, so what I can do is I will take this username and check against my database. Okay, that if the user is available, cool, successful, otherwise unsuccessful. Simple thing. So let's do that. So what I will do is, rather than return null, I will just take the object of user, and this user should be daily code buffer security.user. So I'm taking this user object equals to user repository dot find by username, and I'm going to pass username here. So with this, I will get the user here. Now I can check if objects dot is null of user, then throw exception, else return new custom user details service with the user object. This is throwing some error, we will figure it out. But other than that, if the user is not available, then I can print sout user not available and throw new username not found exception. Okay, and I can say user not found. Okay, you can see that it's a simple thing that we implemented here. Now when we return this, what we should return is we should return the user details, right? So user details is the interface and it has all these different methods. So we need to have the implementation of these user details as well. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to do one custom user details. So within this, I'm going to create a class and say custom user details. Okay, this is the class which is going to implement user details. Okay, and implement all the methods. So let me just implement all the methods here. I'm implementing all the methods, and what I need is I need private final user, and this user is what? This user. And I will create one constructor which will take this. So now from here, rather than custom user details service, I'm going to pass custom user details, which will take the user, and it's the implementation of user details interface. Okay, so now if I go here, I get the user, this user is here, and this is defined here. So let's go to all this. So if I do string.get username, it should be user.getUsername. Okay, is account non-expired, return true. It's not expired. Is account not locked? True, it's not locked. Is credential not expired? Yes, true. We can have the different implementation of all this based on what data that we are storing. Okay, we can store timestamp, if the account locked, not locked, that type of flags also we can store. Okay, but currently we are just storing this two username and password things. You can see the user is enabled or not, all these things we can store. Okay, so we have just added the implementation of all these methods. For grant, what we can do is we can say return, as is a collection, so return collection dot singleton object, collections dot singleton, new simple grant authority, user role. Okay, so everyone will be having a user role here. Okay, so simple implementation that we have defined. Password is there, so user dot get password. Okay, so you can see that all the entire implementation has been added here. Okay, so now you have defined custom user details service and the custom user details. Now when we log into the system, okay, when we go to the user controller, when we try to log in, we can use that user service. Okay, so what we will do is, okay, so we need to implement this login API here. But before we implement this login API, if I go to any other APIs as well, that should be authenticated against the database what we have created, right? That's what it should work for. So for that, what we can do is we can have the custom user details, whatever we have implemented, that should be configured. So let's configure that in the next section. So in this section, let's configure all the APIs should be authenticated against the database that we have. So in the web security config, what we have defined is we had this user details service which was authenticating our request with username and password. Now all those requests should be authenticated against the database which I have. So whatever the users I logged in with or registered with that only I should be able to log in. So rather than this user detail service, I need to have the custom implementation of it. And I already did the custom implementation of user detail service. So if I go to service layer, this is the custom user details service that I implemented. Okay, and this is the custom user details object that we are passing. So this too has to be authenticated. Okay, so what we can do is we can go back to web security config, and here let's configure it. So to define this particular user details, if we go to the diagram here, okay, so this is the user details that we need to configure. So to configure this, what we need to do is we need to override this provider. Okay, so what we will do is we'll override this provider where we'll define this. For this authentication provider, this is my user details that you can use, which is the custom user details that we created. By default, we were using this one where we just injected that and it was working. Now as we have custom one, within this we have to pass these two things. So let's do that. So we'll go back and here we'll define that authentication provider. So we'll define public authentication provider. So this is the one, authentication provider. Okay, and what will be my authentication provider? Earlier it was in memory, now we have DAO authentication provider. So it will be DAO authentication provider equals to new DAO authentication provider, and now I can define provider dot set user detail service. So which user detail service I want to set. So here I need to pass the user detail service. So let me just create the object of it. So I can create private final user details service. Okay, this is the interface, and I can inject it with the constructor parameter here. Okay, now as we have only one implementation of user detail service, which is custom user detail service, it should work. Now for this custom user detail service to inject there, I need to have that as a component. Okay, that only Spring knows that there is an object and I can inject here. So now user detail service is there, I can inject this user detail service here within this. Okay, now one more thing we need to add, provider dot set password encoder, because as we are directly using plain text password currently, I need to set that as well as a no op password encoder dot get instance. Okay, and then return provider, and this has to be my bean. Okay, so now I have authentication provider injected here. Okay, so everything is done. Let's restart our application and check everything was working fine or not. So my application is started now, and if I go to my database, and here you can see that I have username as Shabbir and password as Shabbir. So for this it should work. So now what I can do is I can go to Postman, I can go to this product API, and for this Nikhil and Nikhil authentication, it should not work. And here you can see that it is not working. But if I pass Shabbir and password as password, let's see if it is working or not. And here you can see that it is completely working fine. So now you can see that my custom authentication has been working completely fine, right? Though my login API is not implemented completely, okay, it is just checking for the username, but we will check later how we can completely use login and register API. Okay, now what I want to do is, as I'm directly using basic authentication with username and password as just the plain text, that it is not production ready, right? It is not production grade. So I need to make sure that I am using production grade quality passwords as well. Okay, so whenever I save the data to my database, okay, I will decrypt that password, encrypt that password, and with that encryption I will save in database, and when I retrieve the data, I decrypt it and then authenticate against that. So let's implement that in the next section of the video. So in the previous section of the video, we implemented the custom user detail service and the authentication provider, custom authentication provider, which is authenticating our username and password against my database. But my password is plain text password. So what I need to do is I need to store the encrypted password, and whenever I pass the password, that should be authenticated against that encrypted password. So let's implement that. So if I go to my IntelliJ IDEA, I have already implemented within the web security. Here you can see that I have added the password encoder as no password encoder, which means that there is no password encoder. It's a plain simple text. So for that, what I can do is I can use the another password encoder. So what I will do is I'll create another bean, and let me just define public bcrypt password encoder, and this is gonna return the bcrypt password encoder. And let me just create a method which is gonna create a return new bcrypt password encoder and of 14 strength. Okay, and let me just create a bean out of it. Okay, so now you can see that I've created this bcrypt password encoder. So that means that everything should be encrypted, decrypted against this. So now rather than using this password encoder, what I will do is I will just comment this out and I'm gonna use bcrypt password encoder. So now my authentication provider has a proper password encoder. But now when I register here, okay, at that time I should have the correct details. So for this, what I can do is I can first have the user service created which can handle it. Okay, so what I will do is let me just create a user service here which can do all those business logic for me. So let me just create a Java class with a user service. Okay, and this is going to be my service, so I'll just annotate with other service annotation. And here I am taking private final user repository first of all, and then I am taking private final bcrypt password encoder object, two things. Okay, and let me just create the constructor out of it. Okay, now what I will do is rather than doing everything in user controller here, okay, what I will do is let me just do private final user service. Okay, I'm creating the object of user service here and adding the constructor parameter so that I have the object of user service. And rather than saving here, what I will do is let me just, okay, what I will do, I will just do user service dot register method, which will take the user and it will return the user object. Okay, so now with register, what I will do, I will create the object, method register in user service. Okay, now I will call return the user repository dot save user. So here you can see that I have everything, but in between now what I will do is I will do user dot set password equals to bcrypt password encoder dot encode user dot get password. So now whatever this plain password that I'm taking as the input from the user, I'm encrypting it and then saving it. Okay, that's the simple chain that I did. Cool, right? So now let's restart our application and let's see how everything works. So now you can see that my application is restarted. Okay, application is started. I will go to the Postman API, and this API was completely working fine earlier as I have Shabbir and password is password. And if I hit on send, and now you can see that I'm getting 401 unauthorized. Okay, so let's see the magic. So what we will do is we will go to the register API. So we'll register API and I'll just change ID to 2. I'll just change to Nikhil and password to Nikhil. Okay, so I am trying to register a new user. So let's register it. So here you can see that I registered a user. My username is Nikhil and this is the password. This is the encrypted password. Okay, so now in my database you can see that Nikhil is not stored. It is stored this way. So no one will be able to understand or no one will be able to see what is my password other than the user. Okay, so now if I go to DB and if I query again, and here you can see that for user Nikhil, the password is encrypted. Okay, so we save the data with the encrypted password. Now let's check the login part. So if you go back to the Postman now, and if you go back to the product API, and if I pass Nikhil here, and my password was also what? Nikhil, because that's what I had saved. You can see that this is the password that I saved. So now if I pass Nikhil and Nikhil, I should be able to authenticate. Here you can see that we got 200 and we got the data as well. So this is now solving my purpose, that whatever the registration that I'm doing for the user, that is getting saved in my database with encrypted password, and I'm also able to log in with that password correctly, and internally it is decrypting that password and matching that password for me as well. So my complete login and registration part is working fine. Awesome, right? So my complete flow, you can see that complete flow is working, where I'm able to save my data with encrypted value, I'm able to get my data with encrypted value, and able to authenticate that as well. So this is how you do login and registration in your Spring Boot application with Spring Security. In this section of the video, let's understand what is JSON Web Tokens and what is the importance of JSON Web Token is. So first of all, before we understand what is JSON Web Token, let's understand how the SSO works and why there is a need of a JSON Web Token. Okay, so in the earlier section of the video, we understood that whenever you try to log into the system, okay, whenever we are logging into the system, what it will do is it will create the session ID. Okay, so it will create the session ID. Suppose you are logging into Facebook. So you are logging into the system, it is creating the session ID for you, and then you are able to access your home page, your feed and everything. Okay, and your session ID remains here as it is, and you're able to do all those operations. Now what happens is, with the same Facebook, now Facebook has also acquired Instagram, then you have Threads, then you have Facebook Marketplace and everything. So you can see that now there is a lot of application portfolio. Okay, so now what you have to do is you have to register and you have to log in to your Facebook, and it will have one session ID which will handle your feed and everything. For Instagram, you log in again, you have the session ID again, and it will allow you to access Instagram. For the Threads, the same thing, it will allow you again, and for Marketplace also you log in and you allow everything for you. So now you are creating the account for each and everything, and for everything you are logging in. Okay, but this is too much, right? Because now I have to, for the same account, for the same information, I have to log into each and every different system, and I have to log in with each and every different system. As is the umbrella within the one company, they should handle my user as a one user which can have the access to all those different accounts, right? So that's where SSO comes into picture. That is the single sign on. That means that I can log into Facebook with the same information. I can log into Instagram, to Threads, to Marketplace, everything with the same login. Okay, so once I log in here and I give access to each and everything with the same detail, I should be able to access all those information. I should not be creating accounts and logging in different places. Okay, how that can be maintained? So for that, there is a new tech evolved, that is the JSON Web Tokens. So what it is a token provided to you saying that, okay, this is the token which knows each and everything about you. So that means that this token knows each and everything about the login details, the authorization details, like what all access you have and till what time you have access. So that means whenever this token is supplied at the time of request, system can authenticate and authorize that, okay, this is a token for Shabir. Shabir has access to Facebook and Instagram. It does not have access to Threads, so that whenever this token is passed to log into or to do any activity on Facebook and Instagram, it will allow me. But if I do anything on Threads, it will say that you are unauthorized. You cannot do any activity because you do not have access to it. And that information is stored in JWT. Okay. So this is the basic and simple example that I can give you. If you have better understanding or better example, you share that detail with me, I can elaborate more on that particular section as well. So this is the simplest form of what the JWT token means and how it is being used. That means that once you log into the system, you create a JWT once. This JWT will have all the information. Okay, so let's see what it will have. So there is a JWT website which will show us many things about it. So if I go to jwt.io, okay, you can see that this is a JSON Web Tokens, and this is the token. So if you see that this token is divided into 3 parts, that is your header section, your payload data section, and your signature section, like who verified this particular token. Okay, token has to be verified, then only it can be used. Okay, so here this is a token, so every request will be passed with this token to be authenticated. Okay, now this token has, you can see header information, like how this particular token is been decoded with what algorithm. So here you can see that it defines that what is the algorithm used. So you can see that it was HS256 algorithm. Based on that, this token was created, and it will show what data it has. So you can see that it has the data, who is the subject, okay, to whom this token refers to, and the name, like this name can be used for anything. Okay, and there may be multiple different custom attributes that we can add. And then there are 2 attributes, issued at and expired at. Issued at means at what time this token was issued, and expired at means what time this token will expire. Token will always have the expiry date, and based on that expiry date, your token has to be created. And if the token is expired, you need to create a new token. Okay, and then the signature, like how and which algorithm was used to verify the signature. So the signature is generated, and every time you pass this data, the signature will be verified that okay, I am the system that created this, and I'm verifying the token, and then only you are allowed to use it. So there will be no data leak as well. Now let's understand how the JWTs will be used in your application. So let's understand how the JWTs will be used. So let's take the example that you are logging into system, and okay, so suppose this is your system. So let me just say this is your application, and this is the user. Just trying to create the sequence diagram here. Okay, so I am doing the request here for registration. This is the registration request. So user is able to register the system, and your username and password has been saved in your system. Awesome. And you can do all sorts of things, like you verify your email ID, you verify with OTP, whatever things we need to implement. That's the business logic side. We can implement all those things. But consider that you created the registration where you are just taking username, password, all those details, and you're saving into a system with encrypted details. Okay. Then you do the login request, and user is trying to log in here. Okay. With username and password. And what you do in return is, once the user logs into the system, what you do back is you give the data back to the user saying that this is your JWT token. Okay. So once the user is logging in, you are passing the JWT token. Now it's the client's responsibility to store this token. So client will take this token and store in your client. Suppose in maybe it's your browser, right? So in browser's local storage, they store this token. That's the client's responsibility, because you have already logged in and your application has already authorized you, authenticated you, and gave the token to you. That okay, you take this token, and next time whenever you do any request, you pass this token to us, and we will verify that token is valid. If the token is valid, you are allowed to do anything based on the limits of the token. Okay. So now next time the request will come that okay, now I need a request to see the home page. Alongside that home page, we will pass the JWT token. Now this request will come here to the application, and this application will verify the token. Okay, whatever the token is passed, does this token have the proper right information or not? Does it have the proper roles or not? Proper username, proper password, proper expiry date, everything. Okay, so whatever the token information has, all those token information will be verified, and if that verification is successful, then it will say that okay, this is your home page, you can see anything in this home page. Otherwise it will say that okay, this token is not valid, you can say invalid token. If the token is invalid, that means the user is not authorized to see that information or not properly authenticated. Okay, so this is how the flow of the token will be. So token has to be maintained by the client in any of the browser storage or wherever the token is been maintained in that particular storage. Until and unless a token is valid, you can do those operations based on your roles and responsibilities of that token. Okay, if you have two APIs, one is admin API, one is user APIs, and admin APIs can only be accessed by admin user roles, and user can be accessed by only user roles. Then if the roles has user, then you can only access this API. If you try to access admin API, then it will say that it is invalid token, you are not authorized to access this. Okay, that's what the roles will define. We can define all the different roles accordingly, it should be implemented. So I think that should be clear now, that this is how the flow would work, and we are going to implement the JWT in our application using the same thing. So we already have the registration API working, that you are able to register and you store username and password correctly within the system. We were working on this login API where we authenticate the user and password and was getting the success on failure response. So now let's implement that whenever the user and password are correct, you pass back the JWT token. Okay, so let's implement that. So in the previous section of the video, we saw that what is JWT, how JWT works, and what is the way that your client handles the JWT token for you, and how the server handles the JWT token for the application. We also created the register API to register our users. Now let's talk about the login API. So what we have as a login API is, if we go to the user controller, okay, this is my login API which takes the user, and this based on the username it is checking everything. So rather than this, what I can do is I can define a verify method that can verify that the user is correct or not, and based on that it generates a token for me. Okay, so let's do that. So what I will do is I will comment this out. Okay, and what I will do is I will just say return user service dot verify. Okay, verify my user. Okay, this method is not there, so let me just create a method that says it's verify. So show context, create a method, and what I will do is I will just copy paste all this thing and paste here. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the user here and I'm checking that user is available within the system or not, and if the user is there, then rather than this I'm passing suppose any token. Consider this is the JWT token, and if not, returning a failure. Simple. Okay, simple things. Let's go step by step. So if it's successful, it should return me token. So my application is restarted now, and application restarted. So let's go back to the Postman. Let's go back to the login API, and if I pass nickel send, and you can see that I'm getting the token. If I pass anything else, I am getting a failure. Okay, that's good, but I am still not checking this password here. You can see that if I pass the password wrong, still it is completely working fine. So this is useless. So we need to make sure that whatever the username and password are there, both should be matched. Okay, so let's implement that way. So now rather than just checking the username in DB, I should check it is properly authenticated or not. Okay. So what I have to do here is, if we scroll up here, okay. So now this authentication manager, which handles everything of user details service and everything, this is what we need to take the control in, that how you authenticate it. Like this authentication manager should now go to authentication provider, that is my user details service provider that we have added, that is a DAO authentication provider, that should be injected now, right? So let's do the injection and let's pass the details. So what I will do is I'll go to the web security config. Here you can see that authentication provider we have already added. Now we need to provide the authentication manager. Okay. So authentication manager, I can define public authentication manager, and I can define a bean of it, and I can take authentication configuration. Okay. And then return configuration dot get authentication manager. Okay, and let me just define throw the exception. So here you can see that we took the control of authentication manager. So this authentication manager I need to inject here, I need to use it here. So let me just put it here. So I can define, now I need private authentication manager. Okay, and let me just define this also final. So I can add constructor parameter. Awesome. And here I can use it. So directly just using find by username, I can use authentication manager. So here I can check that now authentication manager. So authentication manager dot authenticate. Okay, what I need to authenticate? Authenticate takes what? Let me just check. Authenticate takes authentication as the input and returns the authentication. So that means that it is taking some data, signing it that this is authenticated and returning back. Okay, that's what it is doing. So I need to pass the authentication as the input, which will give me the same authentication back. So if I go here in the authentication, this is the interface, right? And if I see what are the different implementation, so here you can see that there are different implementation of this authentication, and we know this, that is a username and password authentication token, which is taking username and password with us. You can see that it will be taking, yeah, it is taking principal and credential. So it's taking username and password and it is authenticating for us. Okay, so we can use this. So let's use this information. So what we can do is we can pass new user name and password authentication token. Awesome. And here we can pass user dot get username and user dot get password. Okay, and let's introduce a variable. So we're gonna use refactor and introduce a variable. So this is the authenticate. Okay, so you can see that it's simple. Using the authentication manager that we created, we call the authenticated method where we are passing username and password authentication token, because we want to authenticate using the username and password, which in turn this completely returns me the authenticate object. So we are passing the authentication object which will authenticate that, and it will return me the authenticate object. Simple. So now rather than just doing find by username, I don't have to do this. So I'll just comment this out. Okay, now rather than checking the object is null, what I can do is this authenticated. So I can check authenticate dot is authenticated. If so, return me the token, otherwise don't return me the token. Okay, tell me failure, that's it. So let's check again. So the application is started now. Okay, application started. What we will do is we'll go back to the Postman, and now with Nikhil it should give me 200 success. Okay, now if I change the password, it should fail. And yes, you can see that now password is also taken into consideration because we took the authentication manager in control and we told that authentication manager that this is my username and password and you authenticate against it with my login API. So now you can see that my login API is working completely fine, which if my username and password is correct, then only it is giving me success. Okay, so if I pass Nikhil, then only I will be able to get the token. Now this is a dummy token that we are passing, but we need to pass the actual JWT tokens, right? So we will implement that as well. Now to implement or to generate a JWT token from here, we need to have some of the dependencies of JWT to be added in our project. So let's add those things as well, so that we can generate this JWT token and then we can verify that JWT token. Okay, so what we will do here is that we have to go to the browser here, and what we will do is we'll search for JWT Maven. Okay, so we'll search for this and this is what it gives us, JWT. So let me just go to JSON Web Token. Okay, so this JWT API, JWT Implementation and Jackson. Okay, these are the fields that we need. Okay, these are the things, dependencies that we need to be added in our project. So what I will do is I'll just copy this dependency. Okay, so if I go to Jackson, so if you see latest version is 0.12.6. This is what I'm going to use. You can use the same version available. So let me just add this 3 dependency and let's continue from there. So I just copied the dependency from here, and what I'm doing is I'm going to IntelliJ IDEA. I'm going to Postman here, and within the pom.xml file, within the dependency section here, I am just adding this dependency. Okay, so 3 dependencies that I've added, that is the JWT API, JWT IMPL and JWT Jackson. These 3 dependencies which we talked about, those 3 I have added as a runtime scope and the version is 0.12.6. Okay, once I have added this, I will just refresh Maven. Let it reload all the dependencies and we will continue from there. So here you can see that all the dependencies are loaded, JWT API, IMPL and Jackson. Now what I can do is I can use it to generate the JWT token. Okay, so as we come back to our login API, so where is our login API? The login API is user controller. This is a login API. I come here to user service, go to verify method, and using this verify method, I authenticated here. Okay, that whatever the username and password that I'm sending, those are correct. Once that is done, I'm coming here and I am checking that if it's authenticated or not. If it's authenticated, I should send this, otherwise not. So now what I'm going to do is, rather than passing this value here, I want to generate a token. So what I will do is I will create a service that will generate the token for me. So within this service section, I will create a new service. I'll say JWT service. Okay, and I'm gonna create a service here. Okay, then what I will do is I will come here and I'm gonna create private final JWT service. Okay, I'm gonna use the JWT service and I am going to inject it. Okay, so this is injected. Awesome. So now what I can do is, rather than passing the value from here, what you do is you use JWT service and then say generate token, which takes the user object as the input. Okay. And then let me just create this method in JWT service. Now this method should create a token and send back. Now I need to generate the token. Okay. So to generate the token, what I need some details which I need to put in the token itself, then some secret key to generate a token and wrap around everything. I know jibber jabber. I also didn't understand something. So let's go back to here. Okay. So let's understand. This is what I need to generate. Okay. To generate this, what I need this information. So this is what I need. This is the information I can add directly, that okay, what is the name, subject, principal, why, when it was issued, when it was expired, everything. And I can also add the different claims, like what was the roles, what is the name, subject, everything. Those are the claims attributes, your payload data. Okay, this is what I can do. I will add all those information. Then what I need is, you can see that your 2256-bit secret key. So I need this secret key as well. So I need to generate some secret key from somewhere so I can add it. Okay, so that is one thing. I will need one secret key. Then what I need is, I need to wrap everything around with one of the algorithms and then generate this token. Okay, so let's identify those things first. Okay, so first of all, let's do this. Let's get the secret key. Okay, so what I need is, I will go here and let me just define private secret key equals to null. So this is what I need. Now I need to generate some secret key. Okay, so what I can do is, I can go to browser and I can say generate. So there are a lot of different secret key generator you can use. Okay, so here you can see that there is a key generator. Okay, different, you can see that this is a secret key, right? So somewhere you will be able to generate a secret key. Okay, and if you want, I will add the code as well to generate the secret key. Once you generate a secret key, you keep it handy within your system, and the same secret key you can use always to generate your JWT tokens. Okay, make sure that you keep the secret key same, based on that you generate, so that next time when your request goes to any other system where you are using the same JWT key, you are able to authenticate that request. Okay, so that's how we should be using. We should be keeping one JWT key secret key, and using that secret key we should always be generating our token. We should not be generating our JWT key every time new, otherwise we will not be able to authenticate properly. So I already have generated my key using any of the using this online tool. Okay, we can copy it from here and we can use it. So let me just do the same thing here. I will come here, and what I will do is, I will create one method, public string get secret key equals to, okay, so this is the method. Now what I need to do is, I need to generate a token from here. So let's do this. To generate the token, what we need to do is, we need the object of JWTs. So you can see that we have the JSON web token object. This is what we need to create the object. So what we will do is, we will define return JWTs dot. You can see that we can do a lot of different things. Okay, so first thing what we need is, we need the claims. Okay, we need to add the claims. So let's do add claims dot add. Okay, and here you can see that claims can be added using the string key and object, that is the map. Okay, so we need to create the map of it. So let's do that. So let's create a map. It's a map of string object claims equals to new hash map, and I will add all the claims here. And then I need to add what's the subject. I can add is the user dot get username. Then I can see I want to add issuer, who issued this token. So issuer is daily code buffer, when it was issued. So issued at, I need to add the date when it was issued. So I can say new date, and I can say system dot current time millis. Okay, and then I want to add when it will expire. So it will be new date system dot current time millis, and then I need to add some date that I want to add 10 minutes of time. So I'm doing 60 into 10 into 1000. So this I need to add here. Okay, and then dot end. Okay, so I need to add a builder here, and then I need to add end dot sign with, because I need to sign it as well. So I need to sign with some key, so I need to pass a key as well. So I can pass generate key method, okay, dot compact. Okay, so this will create my entire token. I need to create a method generate key. So let me just create a method create generate key, and this generate key should be returning a key. So let's do it. It should be secret key. Okay, so let me just change to secret key. You can see that this is also a key. Okay, and this key has an implementation as a secret key. So if I, here you can see that javax.crypto, this is what we need to return. So that's why secret key. Okay, and here we need to create a secret key. So let's implement this method. This key should be generated based on the secret key that we have. So this key is a base 64 value of a key. Okay, so I need to decode to base 64. So I'll just use decoders dot base 64 dot decode, and I'm gonna use get secret key, and this should return me some data. So let me just do refactor and introduce variable. So you can see that it is returning me in the bytecode. Okay, so now I need to return keys dot hmac sh key for bytes. So byte is decode value. Okay, that's it. Okay, so we are using hmac sh key. So now whatever this key is there, so what we need to do is, I have by default added this key here. Okay, but what you need to do is, you need to make sure that you pass this key in some environment variable, you get that value from that environment variable, and then inject it here. Okay, that's how you should be doing your production application. Currently I have just hardcoded here for you to understand that what we are getting. So we are taking a key, I'm using that key to decode that value, converting into a byte array, and using that key I am generating a secret key with encryption, that is the hmac sh key, and using that key I am signing it. Okay, so this is which section. If I come here, this is this section, signature verifying. Okay, this is what we are doing currently. We added this section as well, payload data as well, and header will be added directly. Okay, so once this is added, complete method has been added. Now if I go back to my user controller, you can see that this login verify method should verify and give me data. Okay, so let's start our application and check it. So now you can see that my application is started. So what I need to do is, I need to go back to the Postman. This is the username and password Nikhil with the login method. So let's click on send, and it should generate me the JWT token. So here you can see that this is a JWT token. Now if I take this JWT token, I need to verify if it's correct or not. So what I will do is, I will go back to the browser and I will come here and paste the token here. So this is my JWT token. You can see that all the information, the header algorithm is there, payload data, you can see that the Nikhil I have added, issuer is DCB, it was, you can see the issue date time, expiration time. You can see that's a 10-minute difference here, and you can see that the HMAC SHA-256 as well. Okay, so now if I add the 264-bit secret key here, it should be able to validate a signature as well. Okay, so this is how. Okay, so if I go back to my IntelliJ IDEA, if I take the JWT and if I take this value and if I come here, I'll pass the value here, and if I say it is, you can see that the signature is verified. Okay, because the secret key is correct. Okay, so this is how you can see that the signature will be verified. Now what I need to do is, as my JWT token is created, now what I need to do is, next time any request comes based on this JWT token, everything should be authenticated. Okay, so let's see that in the next video. So in the last section of the video, what we understood is we created the JWT token when you are trying to log in. So once you log in with this API, so if you come here, once you log in, the JWT token is created. We verified this JWT token here with all the correct details. We verified the signature as well. So everything is correct. Now what I need to do is, if you go to this API currently, what I need to pass is, suppose I'm going to product. Here I need to pass username and password to authenticate. Currently, this is what it is happening. You can see that I'm passing username and password, then only it's authenticating. If I pass anything wrong, it will fail. But I do not want this behavior. I want a behavior that they should be agnostic to username and password, as I have already created token. Now what I need, I will pass this token in this request rather than this URL. What I will do is I will pass in the header. So in the header, I need to pass as the authorization. So in the authorization, I'll pass as a bearer token. This is how generally it has been passed. Okay, so let me just copy this, come here, and I'll pass this token, and this should send me authentication, and this should send me data. So now, rather than passing username and password, I need to pass this token and then validate my request. Okay, that's the change. So rather than this filter chain, what I need to do is, within this filter chain, this authentication is taking place with username and password authentication. So within this username and password authentication filter, so let me just do, okay, so this is the entire filter chain. There are a lot of filters available. So there is a filter called username and password authentication. Okay, username and password authentication. So whenever I'm passing username and password, this is the filter which take the username and password and authenticate my request and then allow me. Now what I need to do is, rather than this, I need to add a filter before this as a JWT filter. Okay, and here within this JWT filter, I want to say that, okay, take a token, verify the token. If the token is verified successfully and the request is authenticated, okay, how authenticated? If you scroll up here, we have seen that we have the security context within the application filter. So the security context has authentication available. The request is authenticated. Then what I will tell is that, okay, this is verified. User is verified. So I'll tell that, okay, you user and password authentication, you consider this as a success. You don't do anything. I have already verified. Okay. And then username and password authentication will not do anything and it will bypass your request. This is what we need to do to make sure that we have a JWT verification before that username and password verification. So otherwise what will happen is it will always do this username and password authentication. I want to have a layer before that which checks my JWT and tells the username and password authentication that, okay, you ignore your work, I have already done for you. Okay, that's what we want to do. So let's go and implement this. So for that, what we need to do is we need that filter. So let's create the filter. So we'll go to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's create a filter for that. Okay, so what we will do, we will come here within the config and we'll create a new Java class and we'll say this is a JWT authentication filter. Okay, and this is what extending once per request filter. This once per request filter is a filter will come in between for each and every request. So that if there is one request, this will be invoked. So we want this request to be extending this for each and every request. So I need to do filter internal method implementation. That's it. And I have to make this as a component. Simple. Okay. So now this JWT authentication filter I have added, which will do some operation. Okay. So let's do some operation. So now as this filter is there, what we talked about, we need this filter to be added before this username and password authentication. Okay. So we need to do first configuration that. So we'll go to web security config and we will inject it. Okay. So what we are going to do is we will add private final JWT authentication filter. Okay, let me just inject it from constructor parameter. It is injected. Now what I need is I want to tell in my filter chain that what I need to do. So I have a method before add filter before. Okay, so here you can see that it has a method that add a filter before something. So what I need to add, which filter I need to add? I want to add a JWT authentication filter. And where I need to add before username and password authentication filter dot class. Okay. So here you can see that I did a simple thing here, that I added a filter before username and password authentication filter as a JWT authentication filter. Now your JWT authentication filter do all your authentication and tell the authentication filter, that is the username and password authentication filter, that I have done all the work for you. You don't worry about anything. Okay, that's what we need. So let's implement that as well. So now to authenticate this JWT token, what I need to do, let's understand that. So we'll go to the browser. What I need to do is I need to take this entire token. So how I'll get this token? So I'll get this token. If I go here, I'll get this token always as a part of header of the request. Okay. So whenever there is a request, within that request in the header section, there will be authorization header. So within this authorization header, I will have this token and I will have this token as a bearer token. Okay. So it will be bearer space and whatever the token it is. I will take this entire token and I need to convert that token, or I need to use that token to get some values out of it. Okay, so we will implement that. And then what I need to do is I need to get the value, which value I need to take the subject out of it. So whatever the user it is. So what I will do, I will take the user out of it, that is Nikhil, and I will take the user and I will check that if this user is available in my database or not. I will do that authentication, that okay, is user valid or not. I will go to the database and I will check that okay, user is valid. Awesome. If user is valid, then I will also check that the expiration time is correct or not. The token should not be expired. If the token is not expired, okay, then I can say that okay, my user is valid, my user is authenticated as well, whatever the data it is, and token is not expired, then this request is valid. And then you can say that okay, you do whatever operation you want as this request was validated. Now let's implement this entire thing within our filter. So for that, let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA and within here, let's do the same thing. Let's implement this do filter internal. So first of all, what we need is we need string auth header equals to request dot get header and this should be authorization. Okay, let me make it final. So now I got the auth header. Now I need to check that if this authorization header is null, okay, and it's not starting with bearer, then I cannot do anything. Let the next request, that is the username and password authentication, kick in. Okay, let it handle the request. If it's there, then I can do something. So we'll do the same check here, that if auth header equals to null, or auth header dot starts with bearer, which means not starts with bearer, then I can do filter chain dot do filter. I can pass request and response and then return. That's it. I cannot do anything because there is no auth header and it's not starting with header. If it is starting, then I can do something. So I can see final string JWT. So now let's get the JWT token, which is auth header dot substring from 7, because it starts with bearer BEARER, that is 6 characters plus 1, that is 7. Okay, so from 7, what it will do is it will start from this E. It will remove this 7 characters. Okay, and it should start with E and I should get everything. Now once that is there, what I need is username. Final string equals to JWT service. Okay, so I need JWT service as well here. So let me just take it. So I'll just do private final JWT service. Okay, let me just inject it here at constructor parameter. Okay, so I need JWT service dot extract user name. Okay, so let me just create this method. Let me just do return blank. For now we will implement this method. Okay, so now I need a username. So now what I did, I took the auth header. If auth header is not there, okay, do the next filter operation. If everything is good, take the JWT token, remove the bearer from it, and then with that token get me the username. Now I got the username. Now once I got the username, I need to get the security context as well. So we talked about security context here. So if we scroll here from authentication filter, I can get the security context, right? So let's get the security context to identify if the request is authenticated or not. So we will come here and check for the security context authentication. So we'll check authentication equals to security context dot, and it will be within security context holder dot get context dot get authentication. Okay, now I need to check if I do not have this username. Okay, if I'm not able to get the username from here, okay, and this request is not authenticated, then I need to authenticate the request. Otherwise, if the authentication is already there, then I can just pass the filter to the next filter. Okay, so I can check if username is not equals to null and authentication equals to null, then you do your authentication operation. Okay, else you do filter chain dot do filter request and response. Okay, now here I need to validate. So how do I do? So I can get user details here equals to user detail service. So I need user detail service from here, because with custom user detail service I can authenticate. So let me just inject user detail service private final user detail service. Okay, I'm adding the constructor parameter here. Awesome. So again, go back, user detail service, user detail service dot load by username, and I should pass the username here. Okay, which should give me user details. And this load by username, it will do load the data from my database. Okay, awesome. Now once I got this user details, I need to check that the token is valid or not. Okay, based on this user details. So I need to check if JWT service dot is token valid. How do I check? I pass the token and user details both. So against these two, check if it's valid or not. And then we do something. So let me just create the method here and just say return true. We'll implement this later. Okay. So now if this token is valid, what should I do? So once this token is valid, I need to generate the authentication token to send that detail to the next authentication service, that is my username and password authentication. So for that, what I need username and password authentication token. So let me just create username and password authentication token equals to new username and password authentication token, and here I need to pass something. I need to pass user details. I need to pass credentials as null because I do not have credentials, and then I need to pass user details dot authorities. That's it. Okay, so these are the things that I need. If I check here, you can see that it's principal, credentials and authorities. This is what I need. So I have created the token with this. Now once that is done, okay, I need to pass this information to the next filter. So now I can say authentication token dot set details. Now what we are currently doing is we are currently setting the session ID. Okay, we have seen this earlier that whenever we are authenticating our web request, we set the session ID. Now with this JWT, when we are authenticated, okay, we are authenticated, the same details we need to do so that the next filter can understand that. Okay, because the username and password authentication filter will use this information to make sure that, okay, I have the session ID available with me. So this is all good for me. So that's why we are doing it. So within the set details, we are setting that. So we are setting new web authentication detail source dot build details with request. Okay, and if you go to web authentication detail source, here you can see that once it is building these details based on this context, it is setting the session ID and remote address. Okay, this is what the next filter will use to authenticate. So that's the same thing that we added, nothing extra. And then once we do it, we again update our security context because we checked here that our security context authentication is there or not. So it was null, so we came into this. Now we need to set the authentication back. So once we do it, we have to set it. So we will do security context holder dot get context dot set authentication as authentication token. Okay, so here you can see that simple thing that we did. So let's go one by one again what we did. Okay, so this is the JWT authentication filter that we added. This JWT authentication filter should be executed before your current username and password authentication filter. This filter should tell your username and password authentication filter that, okay, I have already authenticated the request on behalf of you. You do not need to worry about anything. So that's what we are trying to do. For that, what we did, we implemented this do filter internal method, which is coming from once per request filter. Okay, here we took the auth header from the request header, that is the authorization. We took the entire auth header and we checked that if auth header is null and it's not starting with bearer, then I cannot do anything, just pass in the request to the next filter. But if I have that starting with bearer and the authorization header, then I'm just removing the bearer from here and then I'm just taking the token. With that token, I am extracting the username with the extract username method of JWT service. We will implement that. Once I get the username, I'm also getting the authentication object from the security context that I am authenticated or not. Okay, then I'm checking if my username is not null, that I do have a username from my token and I'm not authenticated, then I need to authenticate, right? So that's what we are doing, that my username is not null, so I have some username and then I am not authenticated, then I need to authenticate. So now what do I do? With this username, I can get the data from my database as a user detail service. So I call the user detail service, pass on the username, and using the custom user details service object, it loaded the user details for me. Once this user details is loaded, I am validating that whatever the user details data I have in my database, and that data is matching with my token or not. So I'm just checking is my token valid or not. If my token is valid, then I am creating the username and password authentication token. This token is used for the next filter. This token is created, and then what I'm doing is I am setting the session IDs and the resource URL which is needed for the authentication username and password authentication token to validate the details from the security context. So I need to set all these details back because I have taken the control back. This is all the things that we do have to do only one time. Once you are setting these details, you do not have to worry about anything. You do not have to come to this class ever to do any changes again. So don't think that this is a lot of work. This is one-time work, and most of the time this details remains the same. Everywhere you will find the same implementation because these classes are implemented in such a way that you just give the basic information and it should do everything for you. So I'm just giving the same information. Okay, nothing extra. You can find all these details in the documentation as well. You do not have to worry about where should I get to know this, how do I add it. It's already part of documentation. You copy paste it directly and it should work. The same thing that I am doing here to explain you. So this is what I did. I set the web authentication detail source, which is setting my session ID and resource URL, and then the same token I'm adding in the security context back. Once this is added, it will call the next filter. That's it. So your entire filter is implemented. This will be called before your username and password authentication filter. Now I need to implement this two methods, that is the token and the extract username. So let's implement in the next video. Now in this section, let's implement the is token valid and extract username method. So let's go here and we need to implement these two methods. And how do I get this data? So how do I get this data? So getting the data, okay, I forgot to add something because how do I extract? I should extract based on the JWT. So let me just go back here and let me just pass JWT here, that I need to extract from JWT. And let me just add a parameter back, and this is my token. This is my token. Okay, now what I need to do, I got the token. How do I get the username? I need to get the claims from here. Okay, so if I go back here, what I need this response data based on this. So let me just create a method which based on this token will give me this data, and based on this data I will fetch the username. Okay, so let's do that. So what I will do is I will create a method that will get me claims. So it will tell me extract claims. Okay, and it will take token, and what we will do is from the claims we will pass a function. So if we want a username, we will pass a function that will get the username from it based on the claims. So what I will do, I'll just pass claims, and I'll say get subject. Okay, so here you can see that this is my function that I'm passing, I'm giving you the token. Based on that token, you extract all the claims and you run this function on it, which can return me the username, which is a subject. Okay, this is what I am passing. So let's implement this method. So I will create a method here, and you can see that it is taking claims, but it is not the object. This is a function. So let me just change it to function here, and this is a function which is taking a claim, and it will return what? It can return anything. And this is what? This is a claim resolver. Okay, so rather than string, I should be passing t, and this should be of t. Okay, so here you can see that claim resolver. Okay, so this is a simple method which is taking a token and it is applying this function to get me the data. So this extract claim is passing a token and it is passing a function that I need to get the subject from these claims, and this is a function that we need to run. So let's implement this method. So I need all the claims first. I need claims equals to extract claims from the token, and then return claim resolver dot apply on claims. Okay, so you can see that what I'm doing, I am still again extracting the claims from here, and on that claim I am applying a function. So I need this method extract extract claims, which is taking token here. So let me just create a method. Okay, this should give me all the claims based on token. Now how do I get the claims from the token? So what I need to do is I need to use JWTs, and I need to do parser. I need to parse that JWTs, and I need to verify this with a key, that is the generate key, which is returning secret key. Okay, so I need to get this verification, then build the request, and then dot parse signed claims. Okay, so now I am parsing all the claims, and from where I'm parsing from token dot get payload data. Okay, so you can see that it's simple thing that I'm doing, and I am returning that. Okay, so if I go back here, this is what I did. I took this entire token, and then I took this secret key, okay, whatever I have, and then I verified that, okay, with this secret key I'm able to verify this JWT token, so this is verified. Now once it's verified, take this token and then convert into claim and return me this payload. So once this payload is returned, then with that payload I can run a function which can return me the subject. Okay, so this is what happening. This method is returning me the claims. So here I've written the all claims, and within that claims I am applying a function which gets me the subject. Okay, simple thing. You do not have to worry about, you just have to write it once. Okay, you can see it's simple thing. I have just generated a key, and I have parsed the claims, signed claims which are already signed, and then get the payload, and on that payload I have applied a function. That's it. So your extract claims, that is extract username function, is implemented. Now we need to implement this, is token is valid or not. So let's implement this function. Now what I need is, so now with this token is valid or not, I need to do two things. I need to get this token, get the username from this token, okay, and then match it with the username in this user detail service. That's the one thing. If that two matches, then we can identify that, okay, both the user is same. That's the one thing. And then from this token, I need to take the expiration time and check that the token is not expired. Okay, two things I need to do. So let's do the same thing. So first of all, from the token, what I need a username. So let's find the username. We already implement the extract username method, so let's use it. So I can say final string username equals to extract username, and I can pass token. As we have already implemented this method, I got the username. Awesome. Now I can say return username dot equals user details dot get username. Okay, and also check is token expired. We'll pass the token, and here I can say and it should not be expired. Okay, let me implement this method. So here you can see that I'm doing two things, that I took the username from the extract username method and I'm checking that this username should be equals to the username in this object, and also the token should not be expired. If that is a two thing, then I can say my token is valid. Now let's implement this method, that token is expired or not. Now from this method, I need to check if the token is expired or not. So that means I need to extract the expiration time. So let's implement that. So I can say return extract expiration based on the token and check is this before. Okay, let me just show context and create a method, and let me just add it's the date. Okay, and I can say if this is before new date, which is current date. Okay, so here you can see that I am extracting the expiration time as a date that should not be before the new date. Okay, if the expiration time is before the current date, that means the expiration is expired. Okay, so that's why we have implemented. Now I need to extract the expiration. How should I? It should be similar to what we extracted the username. So we'll just define extract return extract claims. Here I'm going to pass token and as a function. So function is claims dot get expiration. So this will return me the expiration time. It will come here, it will get the expiration time, and it will check it's before the new date or not. If it is, it's expired. That's it. You can see that now all the methods are implemented in my application. So entire JWT service is implemented with all the different methods. Mainly three methods are being used here. That is the extract username, then is token valid or not, and generate token. That's it. Okay. So now let's restart my application and let's check everything is working fine or not. So here you can see that your application is started. What I need to do is I need to go to Postman, and first of all I need to log into my system. Okay, so Nikhil is my username and password, and what I need is I need to send this request to generate the token. So here you can see that my token is generated. Now I need to take this token and I need to go to this request. Okay, that is a product request where I need to pass the authorization header with a bearer token. So here what I am doing is I am taking the entire token and passing here. Okay, bearer space token, and then if I hit send, it should authenticate this token and get me the data. So here you can see that the authentication happened, and it was really fast because it was already pre-authenticated. It should not have to go to the do all the complete authentication. So you can see that always I will get the data. Now if I change anything, suppose I'm adding some extra, now this token is not valid. So it should fail, it is not authorized. Okay. So this way you can see that you are able to authenticate. Now if I don't pass this token, I should not be authenticated. It should get 401 unauthorized. So here you can see that we completely implemented the JWT authentication and authorization using Spring Security 6 in Spring Boot 3. Now in the previous section, we completely implemented the JWT authentication. We registered the user and we logged in the user, and based on that we generated the JWT token, and with that JWT token we were able to get all the APIs working. Okay, now how this is used in microservices, right? So that's a great question, and let's see how this is done, and we will also see how this is implemented in the UI. Okay, so in the UI what will happen is, this is your client, this is your browser. Okay, now this is your application, your server application, and you did the request, login request, and with this login request what you have is you have the response as a JWT. Okay, so you generated the JWT response. Now this JWT response is added as a browser local storage. Okay, now this is saved here, this JWT. Now whenever new request comes, what it will do is client will, for every request, this JWT token has been added, and app server will authenticate and authorize this request. that okay, whatever the JWT token is there, whatever we implemented, that way we have to implement and check that this JWT token is valid and not expired, all those things. Okay, this is how your UI will handle your JWT tokens. Okay, now how do we log out from here, right? I get this question a lot, like how do you log out from the JWT application? It's simple. You just from the client remove this from your local storage. Once you remove this, you do not have anything to validate against, so you end up generating a new JWT token, and that JWT token should be stored again and the request should be sent back. Okay, this is how you should handle the logout functionality in your UI with JWT. Now some people will also ask that why this way? Why can't we send the JWT token back and then change the expiration time? This is one of the way as well, right? We can do, but no, this is wrong, as once the JWT token is generated, it should not be changed. Okay, it should never be changed. Once the token is generated, that tokens remain same and you use that token to do all those activities. If you log out, just wipe away your token, remove your token, and then generate a new token for the fresh activities. That's how we should handle the logout functionality with JWT in our application. So this is how everything should handle with login and logout functionalities. Let's see the same thing in our microservices as well. Now when we are working with the microservices and how we should handle the JWT in that. Okay, so consider this is your microservice architecture where you have the API gateway and you have different services: product, payment, orders, and billing. Okay, now what we should do is there should be a service which generates the token. Maybe suppose user service which is generating the token. So client should call the user service which will generate the token for it, JWT token. Okay, and then whatever you want to use, generally we use via API gateway. So your API gateway should handle all the requests for us, and API gateway should be responsible for authorizing all our requests. So we pass the JWT token for all the requests. Okay, this JWT token will have all the information in the claims in your payload data that okay, this token is for Shabir, the roles is user, and it can access to maybe product, payment, orders, but not billing. Billing, I do not have access to billing. Okay, this all information is there within this token, and this token is signed. So once I go to this API gateway should be able to verify this token for me. It should verify the token and it should identify that okay, this request, this JWT token is verified and it is asking me to access what? Billing. And it can check that okay, this token have access to product, payment, orders, but not billing. Billing is not there and it's requesting for billing. So it can say that okay, you are unauthorized. Simple, from here itself. You do not have to go to billing. But if it says that okay, I have access to product and I want to access product, then okay, I have the product access and my token is valid, it is signed properly, the user is correct, then you are allowed to access product. This is how you should handle your JWT tokens in your microservices. This is for each and everything. You have 100 services, 1000 services, whatever it is. Your API gateway is your entry point for all your different services. Okay, and that should handle like where your request should go to, how your request should traverse through, and is your request authenticated, secured, whatever it is. All your security measures, everything should be checked at your entry point itself. Okay, this is how you implement your security with JWT in your microservices. Once you implement it, your design, your entire application will work smoothly. So this is how we implement JWT with microservices as well in our applications. So here you can see that this was all about the Spring security and your Spring Boot application. So you can see we have covered a lot of different topics, and by the end of this tutorial, you have a complete knowledge about what are the different components of the Spring security, and you will be able to implement in your projects as well. You should no longer be in a situation where you feel that Spring security is a complex topic. You should be able to implement in your system very easily. That was the plan of this video, and hope we have been achieved to doing that as well. But if you have any doubts regarding any of the things that we have covered, then you can always ask me in the comment section below. We have added the links to each and everything in the description below for you to check out all the codes and everything. Go through it and let us know if you want to have a detailed video in any of the topics as well. Comment us down and we will try to prepare a video on that as well. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for the upcoming videos. And I will see you in the next video. Till then, happy coding. Bye bye.